I personally think the days of him being an RB1, even a top 12 running back, are over. I just find it hard I'm going to find it hard to believe that a team will get him and give him the same usage that he got when he was, a top 5 running back.
And Josh Jacobs led the NFL in rushing last season.
Like, so much of their scouting is their technique. I mean,
I bet the Bengals would argue with that.
Well, I guess so. But what offensive linemen are they really drafting? Spending like top draft picks on. Like, usually, how many bust first or second offensive linemen are you finding in the NFL? Like,
very few.
Very few. They're easier to scout.
We're back for another week of Boomer Bust, and we are going to start off talking about bounce back candidates, and then we are going to talk a little bit about the Super Bowl. So, Bryce, we're going to start off here talking about Kyle Pitts.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Pitts has been arguably, when you say like arguably, like one of the most disappointing fantasy players since he came out of the draft.
Me.
I mean, his rookie year wasn't that disappointing, right? Because it's like, oh, he put up like 1,000 yards for a rookie, and you're like, okay, that's cool. Even though I feel like people set the bar so high for him that was still kind of disappointing. But yeah, it was a decent starting line, and then ever since then, in my opinion, Arthur Smith and then the quarterback play has just demolished his career. So he seems like a pretty obvious bounce back candidate. I imagine with the new head coach there and the offensive coordinator that's also like had his say with the Rams previously, that they'll get that offense running pretty smoothly. I mean, I feel like they had it's hard to say less talented, but a similarly talented, position group when it comes to wide receivers and running backs as a whole, going from the Rams to the Falcons. They could get that team rolling, but the most important thing is quarterback play. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Falcons do this offseason when it comes to that position, because it's going to be a huge impact on what we're going to see, mainly from like guys like Drake London and Kyle Pitts in that passing game. I think that Bijan, gets that Kyron Williams role, which will be nice. But I'm hoping, I think, Sully, you're going to agree that Kyle Pitts is the biggest beneficiary from this new head coaching staff, because I know you were absolutely in love with him. I loved him, but not quite as much as you did. So, what do you guys think? Do you think Kyle Pitts is a pretty big bounce back candidate, or do you think maybe he just kind of is not as good as we think he is, or some of us think he is?
I think it might be both. But I kind of wear Kyle Pitts as my 101 as a tattoo that I can't quite get rid of. It is what it is. There might be somebody on here that told me I was an idiot then, and maybe he was right. But Kyle Pitts had over 1,000 yards as a rookie. He didn't exactly have lights out quarterback play in that season either, and he had the same head coach, right? So the talent is there. We know that his second season was cut short by injury, and by all accounts, he played with that lingering knee issue all the way through last year as well. So I have two sort of thoughts on it. Is Kyle Pitts healthy? Can be more Kyle Pitts as a rookie. The only thing he didn't do as a rookie is catch a touchdown pass on American soil. He scored once, and it was in London. So if he can score 5 times, 6, 8 times, the top tight ends are putting up 8 to 10 touchdowns, then maybe he's in that top 3, 4 conversation. The other side of my brain thinks, is he sort of Juju Smith-Schuster-esque, like Juju was lights out, looked like he was going to be a big thing, hurt his knee, and now he is what he is. So I do think he's a breakout candidate. I think that he is a talented player. I think in the right situation, used more as a big slot receiver versus an inline tight end that Arthur Smith tried to do in year 2, we can see that. But I am very cautiously optimistic, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit of everything, right? And we've given him a lot of leeway because of Arthur Smith and us feeling like he wasn't employed in the way that we would like to see him on the field. This guy can do everything, and we were basically treating him as a wide receiver that played tight end when he came out. Probably a little bit unfair to the kid. And then we see Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta come in this year, and Musgrave, and we see those rookies doing pretty well, and we're going, well, where the hell is Kyle Pitts at? Yeah. This is what we wanted. We've seen it a little bit, flashed the first year, but how many times have we seen guys come in, have success, and then just crater almost immediately? So it's hard to tell at this point. Is it injury? Is it all Arthur Smith? Is it a combination of the three, with Kyle Pitts maybe just not being as good as we thought he was? It's hard to tell, but I feel like we're going to find out in just a few weeks at the beginning of the season whether it was all of that or Kyle Pitts is really going to be a tight end that we can count on in fantasy.
Yeah, there's some question marks there for sure. I think the one thing we can all agree on is that the offense is probably going to be more efficient, and he's probably going to end up with the best quarterback that he's ever played with, regardless of who that person is. Another tight end that kind of experienced a little bit of a struggling offense and a little bit of a team regression last season, who I think bounces back, is Dallas Goedert. He is kind of a perennial top 10-ish type of tight end. Struggled, finished, he had a little bit of injury this year as well, but even in the games that he wasn't injured, he was tight end 12 in points per game, which is a little bit below his bar. We saw Jalen Hurts take a step back in terms of passing efficiency. That offense seemed to really miss its offensive coordinator. It was a little bit lost at times, and then we all know how the Eagles kind of tanked out the rest of the season from after, I think it was about week 10 or week 11 on. So my question for you guys is Dallas Goedert what we see, or is Dallas Goedert that guy that we thought is that top column 7 tight end?
Yeah, I think he's still in that range. I don't think anything has changed. Obviously, everybody really struggled late in the season. And with him being banged up, makes sense that he had a down year. I think he's got as much talent as probably anybody past, maybe number 4 or 5 in your tight end rankings. It's just, can that offense get back on track? They're going to be looking at new offensive coordinator again. So is that going to come in and get them back to where they were in 2022 rather than what we've seen late in 2023?
The thing I worried about with any Eagles skill position players was the quarterback, in the sense of he's a dual threat quarterback. And when you have as much talent as the Eagles have on offense, when you got Davante Smith, A.J. Brown, Dallas Goedert, the thing I worried about for them this year, with Jalen Hurts also being a rushing quarterback, was that it's going to be hard to find players with that amount of talent and that type of quarterback to have consistent play throughout the entire year. And I think we saw it with every single player. I mean, A.J. Brown had a nice stretch of really top tier games. And he was definitely the most consistent of the 3 that I just mentioned. But Dallas Goedert and Davante Smith kind of do what I thought they were going to do, and that was just inconsistent performances. And it's not due to their talent whatsoever. It's just due to the fact of just how that offense runs with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. He's not suited to be that guy that drops back and throws for 300 plus yards on a, relatively consistent basis. Like, we only maybe get 1 or 2 of those a year. With other quarterbacks, we can, like guys like Jared Goff. I feel like if you put him at quarterback for the Eagles, Dallas Goedert, Davante Smith have significantly better years, but he's still not as valuable as Jalen Hurts as a fantasy prospect. And that's just what it comes with, So I worry about that again. And I really would like to see Dallas Goedert on a different team, just because I think he is so talented that if he got like a role like a Sam Laporta or like a Mark Andrews or a Travis Kelce, I think he could be every bit as good as them in fantasy production. But just the situation he's in, it's unfortunate for him as a talent, but he's still a top 10 dynasty tight end nonetheless.
I think it's interesting. Go ahead, Rick. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't even know if that's true, because I feel like with Shane Steichen in 2022, we've seen Jalen Hurts do everything you just said that he doesn't really do. So that comes back to the question, like, is it the fact that Steichen wasn't there and that offense wasn't the same as it was the year before and it wasn't ran as well? So I think that is also just a wrinkle in that whole argument. Because when we didn't think Hurts could do all that stuff, he had a season where he did it all and almost won MVP and almost won a freaking Super Bowl. Outplayed Mahomes in the Super Bowl, if we're being honest. So I do think that the offensive coordinator, that's the big question. If they got that right this offseason, then I think we can see more consistent production from the three main guys in that passing offense. Because they're not trying to run Hurts a lot in between the 20s, right? He's getting majority of his carries in short to go and not designed runs anymore. So, while I do agree with a lot of that, I do think there are some other wrinkles where they could get back to what they did.
Jalen Hurts only threw for 140 less yards, or I'm sorry, he threw for 140 more yards this year and one more touchdown.
Yeah, what he didn't do was run, right?
Yeah,
so
he didn't run nearly as much.
He didn't seem healthy to me for the majority of the year from about week 6 on. I think he banged up his knee in one, and I don't think he was 100%. Not that very many guys are 100% later in the season, but I just think that that was the part of his game from the fantasy perspective that was taken away. But even the real NFL perspective, defensive coordinators are pretty smart. And if they know he's not going to take off and run, they're going to defend that team entirely differently. And that's exactly what we saw. And that's what I think the Eagles' downfall was towards the last half of the season, is they were incredibly one-dimensional with a very average run game.
Yep.
And that was it. Like, it was easy to shut them down, and you combine that with their defense kind of falling apart and their secondary being soft. But I think the OC is the key piece, and I don't know if Kellen Moore is the guy I thought he was. Like, I expected him to go to San Diego. That was 10 years ago. I expected him to go to Los Angeles, and that Chargers offense just to go crazy, right? Like, we saw what he did in Dallas for all those years with Dak, and I thought, man, he's got Mike Williams, he's got Keenan Allen, he's got Austin Ekeler, he's got a great young quarterback, and they kind of fell on their face. So now he transitions over to the Eagles, and he's still got a good young quarterback. He's got 2 really good wide receivers, and he's got that tight end that can be Dalton Schultz-esque. And I think that's where Dallas Goedert has the opportunity to take a little bit of a step up. His yards per target dropped by over 3 from one year to the next. I think that's got a lot to do with it. He played less games, or he played more games than the year before and had less catches and targets and yards. So I don't know. I think that Dallas Goedert is still one of those guys, but like we see at running back, the influx of youth kind of pushes him down these rankings a little bit, right? Like, I'm not going to put him ahead of Kincaid. I'm not going to put him ahead of McBride. I don't know if I'm going to put him ahead of some of the other younger, well, certainly not ahead of Laporta, right? So there's 3 guys right there.
4, Brock Bowers.
Yeah, I'm a little bit, again, I'm a little hesitant on Brock Bowers. I'm going to let somebody else tattoo Brock Bowers on their body.
No. The difference is we're not taking Brock Bowers over Jamar Chase
or Marvin Harrison Jr.
Right. Yeah, not doing that. That's the difference. But Brock Bowers is a beast. He's a beast.
No doubt about it. That Kyle Pitts thing is just killing me, man. All right, so from one beast to another beast. This one was a little weird when I was putting this list together, and I was wondering if he really qualified to be a bounce back or not, but I think he does, and it's Mark Andrews. And I know he missed a chunk of the season, and he didn't come back until their playoff loss last week. But this is a guy who's been, top 4 tight end every season, seemed to be the key component of the Ravens offense, and that's a team that changed their offensive coordinator, and it seemed to have a positive impact on guys like Lamar Jackson for sure. I think Todd Monken's offense took a little bit of time for the Ravens to get used to, but then once they did, it kind of started to roll. Unfortunately, that kind of coincided with the loss of Mark Andrews and the elevation and the rise of Isaiah Likely. So do you guys see Mark Andrews bouncing back into top 2-3 tight end range? Or is Isaiah Likely sort of made this a tight end by committee, for lack of a better term?
I think that's exactly what I was going to say. I don't get me wrong. Mark Andrews is still, I think, a top 8 for sure, dynasty tight end. But I worry that Isaiah Likely has proven that he deserves to be on the field and he deserves to get targets. He got a touchdown last week. He's been really efficient stepping up for Mark Andrews when he's been hurt. And Mark Andrews has been – this is 2 years in a row now that he's had some injury, right? So they could
yeah.
I believe he got injured late last year as well. Or maybe middle of the season.
I think he did.
I know he did because I had him in a redraft league. I remember now, and his usage might go down. He might get used similar to like a Travis Kelce in the sense of like Travis Kelce's not on the field as much as you thought he was during the regular season. Playoffs is obviously different, but I mean when Travis Kelce wanted to break, if it was a run play, he wasn't on the field, and they might start treating Mark Andrews like that and get Isaiah Likely out there more. He's a younger guy that's going to be stepping up here soon. Mark Andrews' best years are probably behind him. That's just the sad fact of it. I really like him more in like more in like a redraft setting because I think people will get googly eyes over the Brock Bowers and obviously they'll still be drafting Travis Kelce early and Sam Laporta way early, and I think Mark Andrews could be really really good value later in drafts like that. So I think everything you just said is exactly what's going to happen. Mark Andrews' value is going down, but obviously being an injured player last year, he's a bounce back candidate. Any guys that played top level for that many years, they got injured, are definite bounce back candidates heading into the 2024 season.
Yeah, I think, Baltimore will run two tight ends. They'll get them both involved. Mark Andrews isn't going to be relegated. He's still probably going to be the number one red zone threat for Lamar Jackson. They've got a long connection together. So while I do like Isaiah Likely, I don't think that he's more likely to take targets away from the second wide receiver right now as their roster sits than he is Mark Andrews.
Fair enough.
So that's my stance on them. Obviously, I like Isaiah Likely a lot. You guys know I've been a big fan of his since he came in. But I don't, what could happen is they could go out and get like a true number one receiver. Like Zay Flowers is good, but maybe they go get that big body receiver, and then maybe that contributes more to a Mark Andrews decline than just simply Isaiah Likely stepping up while he's out.
Yeah, Isaiah Likely does like to call for the ball in triple coverage too, so that's probably a downfall for him.
Nothing wrong with throwing the football.
He raised his hand and there's like 4 dudes around him.
Rick makes me think of Andrew's first couple of seasons, and I remember that he was in sort of the same situation, and I can't remember who. It might have been Josh Oliver 1 year, and who's in Carolina now? They drafted him ahead of Andrews.
Hayden Hurst.
So his first 2 seasons, Andrews' snap percentage was crazy low. It was like 58 to 65, and he was still putting up top 15 to top 8 numbers. So definitely has the ability to sniff out the end zone and be relevant in that offense regardless. So I agree. Another guy that I looked at, started off great as a rookie, had an even better second year, and kind of fell off a little bit. Again, a little bit banged up, but didn't miss a significant amount of time. As we transition to the wide receiver position, is probably Bryce's BFF, Jaylen Waddle. Waddle was wide receiver 13, I think, as a rookie, and then he jumped into the top 12, had a wide receiver 8 season, and then he kind of cratered back into like wide receiver 3 range this season. Is this just what we expect out of Jaylen Waddle in this Mike Macdonald offense with Tyreek Hill and that attack on the ground? Or was this an off season for Jaylen Waddle where he'll get back to what we would like to think he was?
Yeah, I think it's health with him. I think that, part of it is you've got a wide receiver on the other side that's going for 2,000 yards. Like it's hard to have a big year when you have a teammate going for 2,000 yards. Because even to get 1,500, you got a 1,300 to 1,500. You got to have probably close to 50% of, probably closer to 65% of the rest of your team's receiving yards when you've got Tyreek Hill on the other side. So that's really, really, really tough. So I never expect a wide receiver to go for 2,000 yards. So I would assume that next year Tyreek Hill will be more normal, I guess, and there'll be more to go around for Waddle.
Yeah, I agree completely. Waddle hurts Tyreek Hill hurts Waddle big time. I mean, imagine you're known for your elite speed, and you still are not the second fastest wide receiver on your team, probably like the third or fourth fastest player on your team, and you're still like would be faster than probably 30 other teams' best players. So that definitely hurts Waddle, and we saw it like when Tyreek Hill only missed, I think, 1 or 2 games. Waddle stepped up and looked really, really good. So that kind of gives you a hint. And one of those teams that he stepped up and was really, really good against was the Jets, who are literally known for how good their secondary is. So that kind of gives you almost like a little like appetizer of what Waddle could be if he was like the alpha wide receiver on that team. And I'm more than confident to believe that he could be the best wide receiver on most of these teams. He just happens to be Tyreek Hill there with him. So once Tyreek Hill starts to decline, which I would imagine is next year, it's going to be really, really hard for him to improve on the year he just had, but it wouldn't surprise me nonetheless. But we're going to see an uptick in Jaylen Waddle's production. I really don't expect him to still be. I expect him to maybe be a fringe top 10 wide receiver next year, unless something happens to Tyreek Hill. But I really look forward to him being that number one guy when Tyreek Hill either retires or sees that huge decline that like some wide receivers do see at the age of 30. Because I believe he's 29 now or 28, turning 29. He's right on the cusp of that, but he definitely doesn't look like he's lost a step yet. So I definitely look to see Jaylen Waddle as a bounce back candidate in the roughly top 12 range this year, more of a wide receiver 2 instead of a wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's still wide receiver 22 in points per game, so health plays into that. Pre Tyreek Hill, his rookie season, he had 140 targets, right? So like that's mind-boggling to have that many targets as for anybody, let alone a rookie. And then 117 in a full season with Tyreek, where he was wide receiver 8, and then injury kind of kicked him a little bit, and he was just over 100, I think 108 or 109 targets last season. So he's still relevant in that offense. I think it's still a 2 wide receiver offense, and we'll see what they do in the backfield with Raheem Mostert. But Achane is definitely going to be back and be relevant, and Tua is their guy. So Tua led the league in passing, and I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon because I don't buy into this Mike McDonald thinking about giving up play calling because that would be one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. So
yeah,
we'll see. Looks like there's a new play caller in Washington, and it looks like it might be our old friend from Arizona, Cliff Kingsbury. And I find that to be rather fascinating for a few components. So he's going to bring that modified air raid offense that had some flashes of success in Arizona with Kyler to his new team with insert quarterback here. But what he does have is some pretty talented wide receivers on that roster. Canada, what are you going to do? One of the guys I think that is going to benefit greatly in that offense, and it's a guy I've been waiting for a long time, and it's Terry McLaurin. And so I don't know if Terry McLaurin belongs later in this conversation in breakouts or in bounce backs, but he's been a top 24 wide receiver before, and I think he has the ability to get back to that again. I think inconsistent play calling, inconsistent quarterback play, and some inconsistent play from the wide receiver himself has led to where he is now. There's another guy on that team that I think is in the same boat, but Rick, what's your takes on Scary Terry? Does he even belong in this category?
I think he does. We've seen some really good play out of him. I mean, going back to his rookie year when he had a touchdown in 5 straight games, and we've seen what he's been able to do, but that quarterback situation in Washington has been a mess since he got into the league. What I think it would have been his second year, we thought we were going to see him with Alex Smith. Alex Smith breaks his leg. And then it's just been tough for Washington at QB since. Obviously, Howell, I mean, I think he was top 3 or 4 in passing yards this year just because they chucked it. Yep. I know he was leading for a portion of the year. So if they're bringing in Cliff, and if you want to believe everything and you want to read the tea leaves, that probably means they're going to at least attempt to make a play to trade up for Caleb Williams.
Sounds like it.
With Cliff being his QB coach there at USC this year, and then him being from Washington, DC and wanting to play for them, apparently. You don't know. You're going to hear a lot of stuff this offseason. We saw Colin Cowherd have to walk it back this week after saying that Caleb Williams wouldn't play for the Bears, and then he has to come back and clarify on Chicago radio that, he'll play for him. He just has concerns. Which, I mean, if you're a quarterback, and you should probably have concerns if it's Chicago because they've never developed a quarterback.
You should have concerns of any team that's drafting number 1 overall.
And
the team stinks.
That's another point. But again, like we talked about last week, these guys are the guys that are supposed to be able to turn around those situations. So I could also argue that if he's afraid of that, then he doesn't have the mentality I want of my quarterback anyway. So
I would agree.
There's a lot of stuff to that. But no matter what, if they did get Caleb Williams or they did get Drake May or Jaden Daniels, whichever way that they would go there at the number 2, if they don't trade up, I think Terry McLaurin's in a better situation than he's been in the rest of his career. But now we are getting to Terry McLaurin approaching 30.
Yep.
Basically, if it's not 2024, then it's probably not going to happen. Like, he's probably not going to have his wide receiver 1 season if he doesn't get it in 2024. That's probably just not a good sign if he doesn't get it this year.
Yeah, it looks like a lot of squandered talent by the Commanders. I mean, that organization is super confusing. I mean, Dan Quinn as the head coach hire was super strange, I thought. And then especially since, Dallas defense was good all year, but then they did show up in the most important game of the year for them. And Dan Quinn's been okay as a head coach. I mean, I guess he did make it to a Super Bowl, but then fell off a cliff after that. And then their offensive coordinator is Cliff Kingsbury an upgrade from Eric Bieniemy? I don't know. I mean, he had Sam Howell leading the league in passing yards. I think that's pretty impressive as an offensive coordinator. I don't think Sam Howell is suited to be a starting quarterback in the league. I think Bieniemy's success shows with the lack of production that we saw from the Chiefs offense all year, along with, I wouldn't say the Washington Commanders were good, but I think we could say that their offense was better than I thought most people would think they were going to be. Obviously, inconsistent play from Sam Howell made them to where they're the number 2 pick still, but nonetheless, he had them, I thought, looking pretty decent for what we expected. So I don't know. I see these mock drafts that also got the Bears taking Drake May number 1. I'm just like, what clickbait are we looking at this offseason where this nonsense is going on? So I imagine with Cliff Kingsbury there, they are going to try and, okay, here, we're going to offer you such a good package that you're just going to want to stay with Justin Fields. You're not going to you're going to take the best option available to you. But even if not, does he take a Jaden Daniels, and try and roll with that Kyler Murray type of offense that he did have with Arizona, a more mobile quarterback? I don't know. I don't really worry about Scary Terry because I'm not really a guy I've been invested in because of the lack of QB production that he's had his entire career. He's been very boom or bust play pretty much every single year that he's been in the league. And I don't think it's his fault. I think that when you don't have any QB talent or you have bottom 3 your whole career, it definitely hurts you. And it's unfortunate for him. So hopefully that they're going to have an upgrade at quarterback, but even if it's a rookie, it's still a toss-up. You don't know. Some of these rookies come into the league with looking like they're going to be really good, and they just don't. They're just not. So hopefully that they get better QB play, even if it's middle of the pack, because I think Scary Terry has the talent to make a middle of the pack QB, or a middle of the pack QB is enough for him to be able to be a top 12 wide receiver.
I really think that Dan Quinn kind of just ended up the head coach in Washington. I think Ben Johnson was definitely the guy that they had circled in that they were flying when they found out that he pulled out. He pulled out of the interview. Yeah, from what I
baseball
understand,
guys or something.
Basketball
guys. Yeah, that's weird.
Guys.
What a weird.
Yeah, but I think what they're trying to do is just reshape that organization from top to bottom, right? So they went from arguably the worst owner in the history of professional sports to a new ownership group with. I can't remember who the actual principal owner is, but Magic Johnson is part of that ownership group. They then went out immediately and hired the GM that they thought was the right guy, and they involved some basketball guys, and there were Rick Spielman and guys like that in that selection process. And then I think they ended up with Dan Quinn, and I think the thing that goes for Dan Quinn more than anything else is he's widely known as a player's type coach. And I think they're just trying to bring a positive attitude into that organization. And I think Cliff does that as well because he's a charismatic guy. He could do a good interview. And when's the last time he saw an interview with Eric Bieniemy? Like, I just don't think he's that kind of guy. That doesn't mean he's not smart, not a good offensive coordinator. He's just not a guy that's going to jump in front of the camera, and that probably hurts his interviews and probably is why he hasn't been a head coach yet. But that's a whole other topic for a whole other show. I don't know. I just want Washington to be good again because I think that's a historical organization that was, when I was a kid, was, Theismann and Riggins and Monk and guys like that, and they were awesome. And I'd like them to be good again.
I do want to just say, if you watched last week's episode, who called that Ben Johnson situation?
Yep, that is true.
I had surprised. 2 calls
I'm
on
still
last
surprised
week's
by that.
We literally sat here and talked about how you cannot MVS, if he's standing by himself, you said you still might not catch the ball. Then literally the last play of the game, MVS standing by himself and he caught the ball. Good for him.
I was proud of him. I did make a really good.
He made a really good catch that game too, like with tight coverage. So
I just thought it was hilarious that
he's
talked
always
about him being open and not being able to catch the ball, and then literally the play that wins the game is him standing wide open. And I was like, dude, we literally just talked about that today.
That's awesome. MVS has been a decent, and I emphasize decent, contested catch guy. His biggest problem is when he's wide the hell open and he just goes, I'm wide open, and drools down his leg. So anyway.
What if we talk about another guy that had a wide open catch that he dropped in a big game last weekend or the weekend before, whatever weekend it was? I don't even know what days it is. Stefon Diggs.
Yeah. Big struggles down the stretch.
Yeah, that was a big drop by a guy that we don't see do that very often. So it was like they switched. Their souls switched. And
like a Freaky Friday kind of thing. Right? Yeah, so Diggs ends up as wide receiver 9, which on the surface looks pretty good. Wide receiver 14 points per game. Kind of not what you expect out of Stefon Diggs. Gets even more interesting. He's wide receiver 4 through the first 10 weeks of the season. They can their OC. They hire Joe Brady. And where is it? Wide receiver 42 the rest of the way. Now, that's a bit odd. And they definitely did highlight a little bit more James Cook and a little bit more Dalton Kincaid in the offense once they changed OC. But Diggs almost seemed to just, for lack of a better term, quit at times. Like his routes were lazy. He's dropping passes. His targets decreased. Like, is he bouncing back from this? Or is he, like, he's not a spring chicken, right? Like, he's got to be close to 30 years old here, if not already. Is he kind of, and I don't want to say done, but is he done as that top 5 wide receiver guy?
Go ahead, Rick. I have strong feelings on Stefon Diggs.
Yeah, okay. I'll try to set this up for you. I honestly don't know. Like the way this season went for Diggs, it makes no sense, right? Like, how are you that freaking good for the first 10 weeks and then you pull an Eagles and shit the bed for the rest of the season? Because he literally did shit the bed for the rest of the season. And it's tough when somebody like that does that, because I'm like, for example, on 2 of the teams in my playoffs, I had Stefon Diggs on them. I'm not sitting Stefon Diggs in the playoffs, even with how bad the last 7 weeks of the season were, 8 weeks of the season were. I'm not gonna not play him and have him go off for a 25 on my bench, and then say, oh, well, I lost my playoff game because I had Stefon Diggs on my bench. But going in the next year, if he doesn't show, then he's a guy that you got to park on the bench and hope that you find a diamond in the rough to take his place.
Well, I lost with Stefon Diggs in my starting lineup on a weekly basis.
So did I.
I trade. A lot of
people did.
In the Grand Prix, I trade for Stefon Diggs and Travis Kelce, and of course, Travis Kelce wants to play awesome in the playoffs. That's great. He couldn't do that. He couldn't do that in the fantasy playoffs. Those two alone definitely hurt my soul, because I traded for Diggs right when he started going off, And he had like 3 weeks or 2 or 3 more weeks of him going off. I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's winning me games alone. Him and Keenan Allen are doing this. Travis Kelce had like a 50-point bomb in there too. But these old, I didn't understand it either. I don't know if it was the offensive coordinator. I don't know if it was Josh Allen, because if you guys remember that playoff game with the Chiefs as well, at the end of the game, Josh Allen took that real deep shot to Khalil Shakir, and like clear as day. I mean, I'm watching the game like, oh, Stefon Diggs wide open. I mean, all they got to get to is this certain yard line. They can kick a field goal and go into overtime, right? And he just like launches it downfield on 4th down, and that's the end of the game. And I don't know if Josh Allen almost gets like too overconfident in his arm, and he's been critiqued for that before, where this guy thinks that he can make, he can make these throws, but you can't make these types of throws on a consistent basis. So it's like he trusts his arm too much to make these insane throws, and it ends up being bad decision making. And he's been known for that, right? And I don't know if Stefon Diggs is just not getting put in the situation to make the plays, because it seemed like a lot of Gabe Davis and Khalil Shakir are getting a lot of these shots down the field more often than Stefon Diggs was, who's more working like the shallow middle of the field. And I don't know. I was trying to look up his target share, like the last half of the season, and compared to the first half, but it wouldn't surprise me if we saw that his targets dipped a lot. And
it sure seemed like it.
And guys like Shakir and Gabe Davis might have increased. And obviously that wasn't working for the Bills. I know they kind of had a hot streak at the end of the year, but they really didn't look impressive in any of those wins. If you saw, I know people were like, oh, the Bills are going into the playoffs on a win streak. And it's like, none of them were impressive wins. Like if you really look at it, the Dolphins didn't beat very many good teams. They barely beat the Patriots near the end of the year. And that's a team they should be beaten by 4 scores. Right. So I'm going to give Stefon Diggs one more year. I think he's got one more left in the tank. I did hear that he said he wants to stay in Buffalo for another year, so maybe he wants to try and run it back. That's a little bit that's good news for me, that he still has faith in Josh Allen and the organization, and he does believe that they have a Super Bowl contending roster with him on it. So, but he is getting to that age where we expect a fall off. But I think it was more of usage than talent.
Let's look at this, right? So week 1, 13 targets, 7, 12, 7, 11, 16, 12, 12. That is the first 8 weeks.
Okay.
From there, we have 7, 5, 8. Got back into the double digits, 11, 11, 5, 8, 7, 8. So definitely saw a big dip in target share after week 8. He only hit 10 targets in 2 of the games. Where he hit in 6 out of the first 8. And he had over 100 yards in 5 out of the first 6 and never hit 100 again. He also had the 7 target, 6 reception, 120 yard, 3 touchdown game in week 4, which was 3 of his 8 touchdowns on the season. He only had 2 touchdowns after that week 8 game. So he had a quarter of his touchdowns after week 8, and I would say looking at probably 30% of his targets came after that date. So he dropped off big after week 8.
5 targets for Stefon Diggs in a game is that's a problem. I mean, that dude should never be getting below 8 to 9 targets a game. So, I mean, it goes to show they struggled in the playoffs. They couldn't score. They couldn't barely score against the Chiefs. They were barely scoring against bad teams near the end of the year, even though they went on that win streak. But hopefully
I think in fairness, they had a pretty tough schedule when they went on that run, right? Like they played some pretty good football teams. The Patriots excluded. Not scoring on the Chiefs is a lot of teams have not scored on the Chiefs. Ask Baltimore how that goes.
That's true.
But I don't disagree with what you're saying, and I think we could do a whole show on this alone. I think if you start peeling back the layers of the Bills' offensive onion, you'll see that the rushing percentage probably increases as Diggs' targets decrease. What I'd really be interested to see is what did Kincaid's and Davis's and Shakir's do while Diggs was declining, because it didn't seem like, and I guess they're spare parts for lack of a better term in that offense, so that you don't see their decline as rapidly or as noticeably as you would Stefon Diggs. But I kind of know Stefon Diggs from the Minnesota days, and I can tell by Stefon Diggs' body language when he's not happy. And you can see it in him that he was pissed for about the last 5 weeks of the season. And he's done the whole, I don't want to be here anymore. He did it in Minnesota. He tried to do it last year he threw Josh Allen under the bus last year and tried to get out of Buffalo. So maybe he's trying a new approach by saying, yeah, it's great here, thinking he'll try the reverse psychology so they get rid
Yeah,
of him.
maybe.
But
That's a good idea.
he's going to be incredibly hard to get rid of because he's a massive number, right? So I think he's back. I think that, they've already taken the interim title off of Brady. He is their offensive coordinator going forward. It'll be interesting. The next Sean McDaniels is probably the guy. McDermott, right? Sorry, is the guy that's probably on the hot seat more than anything else. So I don't know. Like I think Diggs is back in Buffalo, but a wide receiver where I'm not exactly sure where he's going to go that I think has the ability to bounce back is T. Higgins. Now, T. Higgins is another guy that experienced some injury last season, but when he was playing, for lack of a better term, was brutal. I think he finished as like wide receiver, was it 51? But points per game, he was a wide receiver 42. And I know that there was some quarterback challenges in Cincinnati. You had a Joe Burrow that started off hobbled and then ended up missing the rest of the season. But their backup didn't come in and just hand the ball off. Like Browning came in and chucked it all over the yard and put up some solid numbers. Thank you, by the way, for that in the Scott Fishbowl, Jake Browning. Nonetheless, I don't understand what T. Higgins is. And, really liked him coming out of Clemson. Really thought he was a steal as the 32nd overall pick the year that Miami lost their first round pick. So I think he was the first guy picked in the second round. Nonetheless, I thought that was a great pick. But I don't know what's going on.
That wasn't when. No, Dolphins lost it last year or whatever one because the Bears
he was a 33rd pick then.
The Bears pick that they traded to Pittsburgh ended up being that Dolphins, what would have been the Dolphins pick that they lost, and they took the cornerback Porter.
Joey Porter Jr.
Oh, yeah, you're right, because they took the Higgins draft was the Burrow draft. They took Burrow at 1 and Higgins at the first pick of the second round. So, nonetheless.
Yeah, Higgins was Claypool, right? And Pittman, weren't all those guys in the same class? And they all went right there at the front of the second round?
Yeah, so I just think that, wide receiver 28, wide receiver 14 on his resume, wide receiver 18 on his resume, and then wide receiver 51, 42 points per game. So I think it's a pretty clear bounce back candidate. I don't know what the hell happened to him this season. He did manage in a crappy ass season to make a stupid, unbelievable catch to beat my Vikings. Thanks again. But I don't know. Like, number one, I guess, is, we talked a little bit about free agency last week and where he goes. I think he goes somewhere. I think the money just needs to leave Cincinnati.
He's definitely going somewhere. Not
yeah, like he's going to play in the league, right? So right. That's a rather obvious statement.
He's not playing I don't know. Blackman?
Right. Yeah. Oh, gosh. I hope not. I don't see him staying with the Bengals, but that's beside the point. I think he bounces back whether he plays for Cincinnati, Cleveland, or the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I don't think it really matters. So I guess what's wrong with T. Higgins, and does he come back to what we expect him to be, Bryce?
I don't know. T. Higgins to me is one of those guys where I have mixed feelings about him. Some weeks I watch him on TV and I'm like, man, this guy could be a team's number one target. And in other weeks I'm like, man, this guy is super inconsistent. The thing I worry about T. Higgins is that he's looked relatively impressive for the Bengals throughout his career. And most people will be like, look at him and be like, he could easily be the team's number one if Jamar Chase wasn't there. Maybe. I don't know. I worry that T. Higgins could be very Juju Smith-Schuster-esque, as you mentioned earlier about somebody else, where he might not thrive as the number one target on another team. I don't know if he's talented enough to be able to draw number one corners the entire season and be a consistent fantasy producer. I'm going to throw my eggs in the basket and believe that T. Higgins would thrive more as a team's second option, and a very involved second option at that. So like, for example, I think like a team like the Jaguars not necessarily the Jaguars, because I guess Calvin Ridley's leaving, but I mean, even if he did go to the Jaguars, like if he had a split usage with him and Christian Kirk, I think he would thrive in like a role like that. Obviously a team like the Browns, I know that Deshaun Watson's been recruiting him. I don't know if T. Higgins has his own personal masseuse that Deshaun wants to try out, or how that why he wants him there so bad. But like, if you put T. Higgins with Amari Cooper next door, where T. Higgins got the second corner on him the entire time, maybe he would thrive in a role like that. He's a guy I worry about, and as a Patriot fan who needs wide receiver, I'm not sure how I would feel about us. Our organization, targeting a guy like him because of the inconsistent play he's had his entire career. I know I might be in the minority with this
So he'd
train
fit
of
right in
thought.
then.
Yeah, well, yeah, probably. But he'd easily be our number one guy, and he'd be force-fed the ball because there's nobody else to throw it to right now outside of a slot receiver. But I don't know. I think he should go to a place that has still really good quarterback play where he's coming from, but also really good wide receiver play with him to complement him, because I just don't think he's suited to be a team's alpha receiver. What do you think, Rick?
I tend to agree. I agree with that.
T. Higgins is kind of Mike Williams, right?
Yeah, it's a great comp.
I mean, they're both big. They both can make crazy plays. They are very inconsistent week to week from a fantasy perspective. I think they do help their teams more, even in those games where they're not like dominant. Then they help us, obviously, in fantasy.
Correct.
But it just reminds me, same. Obviously, injuries have been a thing too. Missing time. Remind you of anybody else? Mike Williams, maybe.
Right.
And so I agree. I don't think, especially in fantasy, I don't think you want to count on him as your number one receiver. He makes a good number two fantasy wide receiver. Or if you're fortunate, a number three where you're not really concerned with the week to week production. But again, we saw Mike Williams at the beginning of last year before he got hurt have a 9-10 week stretch where he was getting 10-11 targets and I think he was top 12 at that point before he got hurt. And so I do think there's the potential for stretches like that too, if he has the right quarterback. Not that he didn't in Cincy, but you also have Jamar Chase to fend off targets. So that being said, with Joe Burrow's struggles, the backup quarterbacks, more injuries, I do think this was like, I don't want to say floor, but this was more of a product of all of that not going right for T. Higgins during the 2023 season. So I don't think he's that bad for sure. I think he's more of a wide receiver too, both fantasy and in real life.
Yeah, but the thing is, with the wide receiver market and Michael Pittman Jr. is going to get locked down, and how young he is, he's going to get the opportunity. He's going to get wide receiver one paid and probably get forced to be that usage as well. I just worry it's going to be like Juju, and it's going to be a disappointment for whatever organization takes him. But he could be like Christian Kirk, who also got that money, but I think performed way, way higher than anybody expected. So that wouldn't surprise me either. But he's gonna go somewhere where a team's got a lot of cap, and he's gonna get the opportunity to probably be that team's number one wide receiver. So we'll see how it pans out. Hopefully, he proves us wrong, or me. I guess most of us wrong.
I'm trying to think of who has lots of cap and where he could go. He could go to Washington.
Well, I was getting ready to say Washington could. They have, sure. I think they have the most cap, and then obviously, if you are going to take a quarterback with your first draft pick, you might as well get him some more talent at wide receiver.
Or you let Gabe Davis walk and you slide him in beside Mr. Happy, Stefon Diggs in Buffalo, and let Josh Allen go crazy. They don't have the money for that, I don't believe. Yeah. So
I don't know who's got a lot of cap. The Bears got some. I know Washington's got some. I know New England's got some. All the top teams got them in the draft too. So that's good for those teams that do maybe be drafting quarterback for sure.
I'll tell you, Riba, he'd look good with DJ Moore.
Mm-hmm.
Not gonna lie.
I think that'd be a good spot for him too.
But Marvin Harrison will look better, so
yeah, probably. And it'll be a lot cheaper.
That's good. Where is he going to come off the board in the actual draft?
In the actual draft, I think he'll be top 3.
Yeah, but he's not like I've seen stuff where people are talking about him being the first overall pick. That's bonkers, right?
Yeah,
I don't think so. I think he's the safest play in the entire draft. I think Marvin Harrison
if you're the Bears, well, maybe not the Bears. If you're Atlanta, Washington, who else is like quarterback desperate right now? You can't.
Maybe the Vikings.
Oh, no.
The Patriots.
I'm talking just because of the Bears situation. Like if they decide they want to stay with Justin Fields and they can't get a package from because they have to get it in the top 3, right? Because he's not going to go Arizona's 4, and Arizona's not passing on Marvin Harrison Jr. at 4.
No, but it
They're
doesn't. I just can't imagine. I just can't imagine that they won't get at least some little. I mean, even if it's the package they're not, they want. There's no way they just like say New England's like, oh, you know what? We know you're keeping Justin Fields, and we're not going to give you a huge package to go up to 1. I can't imagine you just trade like the 103 and then just even a second rounder or something just to move back because you're still getting Marvin Harrison Jr. at that 3rd pick.
My argument would be that you could do that, and then one of the other 2 teams could. We see stuff come out of left field all the time, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Again, we saw Mitch Trubisky not only go over Patrick Mahomes, but over Deshaun Watson as well, right? So, like, crazy shit can happen. We saw Daniel Jones at number 6. Nobody saw that coming. So you can see crazy stuff. So I feel like to risk it, you have to get paid for that risk to move back. Because what if Washington says, okay, Caleb Williams is off the board. We're not really dying for Jaden Daniels or Drake May. They could trade back with somebody or just take Marvin Harrison Jr. So those are the risks that you're taking if you move back to the Patriots. If you move just back 1 to Washington, then I could see taking a smaller deal, because if Washington's coming back, they're coming up for Caleb. So I could see that, but I think once you go back and Caleb Williams comes off the board, right now looking at it as how everybody views these quarterback prospects, you're taking way more risk, because now any team could be like, okay, well, I don't want to take the Zach Wilson at number 2. If I'm not happy with them and I'm not in love with them, I'd rather get the guy who is safer in this draft than Marvin Harrison Jr.
Maybe
I think it's interesting.
Maybe a tackle, literally. Like
I think it's interesting.
From Notre Dame.
Maybe Joe Alt.
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
Fashanu from Penn State, maybe.
Yeah.
There's talk that the Patriots are taking one of those guys with their first pick.
That would irritate me so bad unless
I would lose it if
somehow unless we somehow got Justin Fields and like signed a wide receiver in the offseason, then that would make sense. Like if they addressed quarterback and wide receiver and then they did that, I'd be okay with it. But if they didn't address both of those positions and then got tackle, I'd be like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Like, we do need tackle bad. We do need tackle bad though, so I can't.
You're going to be a legit wide receiver in the 2nd round too. I mean,
true.
There's this wide receivers deep this year.
But if they took all over Marvin Harrison, if Marvin Harrison was there and they took a tackle like all or something before him, that's when I'd be mad. Like if Marvin was gone and we addressed quarterback, then I'd be okay with it. There's some situations where I'd be okay.
If you have no quarterback and no receivers, the left tackle really doesn't mean that much, right?
Yeah, who are you protecting?
Nope.
It's not the same as Cincinnati having T. Higgins and picking
Joe Burrow and picking Chase over Sewell.
Right. So and then we get dude, just to go off topic for a quick second.
Go.
Was it not super fun watching Detroit put Sewell in motion as a tackle for almost a whole quarter? Yeah, and I thought he was going to catch a pass. Like what they did. Ben Johnson, I love Ben Johnson. He is. You never know what they're going to do.
I read something that said like there's been like this. If you look back to 2017, or I don't remember how many years, or like the last 4 or 5 years, that there's none of the teams have the same offensive coordinators. Because if you're good, you always 2021
get a job.
That's right.
Every team has changed coordinators since 2021.
Yeah,
that's why you hire an offensive head coach if you can, right? So you can lock in that piece. Like McVay isn't jumping ship or Shanahan isn't jumping ship, but when you have a situation, and it's a bad example, but Washington with Dan Quinn as a defensive guy and Cliff Kingsbury, if they go lights out and Kingsbury's a candidate again, then he jumps ship. Like I saw that Baker Mayfield will have his 7th different offensive coordinator in 7 years this coming season. That's nuts. Like I know Cousins had a different one every year until O'Connell stayed for 2 years in a row here, but I don't know, man. Really quickly back to the draft scenario. I think it's draft day malpractice to take a wide receiver with the 101 in a quarterback needy group like this. I get what you're saying. I think the perfect world for Chicago is you trade with Washington because they look hungry. Then you roll into 2, and then you just let the phone ring at 2. And is Atlanta coming? Is New England coming? Like whoever's coming. And then, to your point, don't get crazy. Go to 3, and then go load up on talent, draft talent. So I think that's ultimately probably what the Bears should hope for. But everything I'm seeing is they're using that first pick. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they don't put trades.
Come on.
Stuff and all of that. So
you want them
obviously
to take Caleb?
Yes, I want Justin Fields to be available for New England. I want to have some hope.
So if you're the Bears and Justin Fields, let's just blow this thing up. If you're the Bears and you have Justin Fields available on the trade market and you're fielding calls, what's New England giving you that Atlanta can't?
The earliest second. An earlier second.
Who cares? I think Atlanta has more talent.
I don't think Atlanta gives up. Who's Atlanta giving up player wise?
They could give up Drake London, Kyle Pitts. They could give up. I think they have an. They
got some good old line pieces. They got some good secondary and tackles, and the Bears are talking about adding an edge rusher, and I think the Falcons have some quality there. Plus, teams don't give a shit. They'll give you their 26 and 27 first as well.
Depends if they want player or more draft capital. I guess it just depends on what that team wants.
The Bears, the draft capital. That's the Bears thing. That's what Poole said in his press conference is we're going to build through the draft. And we're going
New England could offer better draft capital. That's what they could offer.
That's fair.
That's it. Player-wise, I guess Judon could definitely be a guy that you could use for a year or two.
My thing is if you're only getting a second for Fields, then you trade the pick and get multiple firsts down the line and do what you did last year and try to get – again, if you get Washington or New England's first for next year, you're likely picking inside the top 6 again with that pick if they go with a rookie quarterback.
That's a good point. If you trade it to New England, you could be picking at 1 again next year. If you trade it to Atlanta, you're probably like Houston, how Houston increased.
Prices why? Why?
Excuse me, come on.
It's just the nature.
You guys hired an OC, right? I can't remember who it is.
No,
I thought you did.
I don't think so.
Let's reel her back in here.
Okay.
So here's my question.
More. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
No, you go. You have a question.
No, I was just gonna say we talked about Higgins. What do you think about Chase?
Yeah.
Which he was still good, but not what we're used to. If Higgins leaves, what does that do for Chase?
Nothing.
I think Jamar Chase is a perennial top 3 wide receiver in the game, regardless of who lines up across from him. Go ahead, Bryce. You look locked and loaded.
I just think that Jamar Chase's the dominoes fell all the wrong way for Jamar Chase this year. He was injured, or Burrow was injured. Like he didn't. How many games did he really get fully healthy with Burrow for fully healthy this season?
Fully healthy, not many, but they played 10 games together.
Right, and his play was inconsistent, and they were both hobbled or one of them were hobbled the entirety of their 10 games together. So he's an easy bounce back candidate for me. He's number 1. I expect him to be a top 3 wide receiver going into this next season. I mean, I guess 4th time's the charm with the Bengals trying to address the offensive line. It can't get any worse. And it's not like they haven't tried. It's just the guys they're getting or signing are just missing. Like Orlando Brown did not do very well this year. They tried to get the big tackle from Dallas the year before. They tried to get the big tackle from Dallas the year before, who was also came in and was very disappointing. So it's not lack of effort. It's just a lack of production from the guys they're getting. So there's some good veteran offensive tackles that are free agents this upcoming season. Maybe they try again. I think there's a couple more surefire guys available for him this upcoming season that might want to get another chance at the Super Bowl, and it seems like that might be the best opportunity and best landing spot for those guys. So look for Jamar Chase to be much better this upcoming season and Burrow to have a little bit more time in the pocket because both of those guys are elite.
Yeah, Jamar Chase is arguably one of, like I said, the 3 best wide receivers in the game, and I'll put Justin Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb in that category, and that's where I'll end it. The good news for Jamar Chase is Joe Burrow's probably coming back next season. He was wide receiver 7 in those 10 games that he played with Burrow, and then he cratered with Jake Browning for whatever reason. That just didn't click. So, and then Chase got hurt and was dealing with that shoulder element and all that other stuff. And the Bengals offense took a step back in a lot of ways last season. And it wasn't just the Joe Burrow injury. There was some weird play calling going on there. There was some inconsistencies from T. Higgins, which we alluded to earlier. The running game was weird. Like, Joe Mixon hasn't been an efficient running back for probably 4 years, but he still has a ton of volume, so his numbers look good. Is Chase Brown something? Because he looked good a little bit later down the road in the season. But I think there's a ton of question marks around Cincinnati, but one that isn't for me is Jamar Chase. I think he is going to be a perennial top NFL and fantasy wide receiver for years to come, regardless of who lines up against him.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at, looking at the list, and I'm thinking, does Chase really even count as a bounce back?
I agree.
So, but then I dug in, looked at the numbers. Basically, 4 games were all his fantasy production. So, out of the 16 that he played, about a quarter of them, he 5 of them he did pretty decent in, but it was 4 that really made up the big part. He had the 12 catch, 141 yard game in week 3. He had the 1,592 and 3 touchdown game in week 5, which is probably, I didn't do the math, but probably 30% of his whole production for the season, if not more.
Yeah.
And then he had a 10 catch, 100 yard, 1 touchdown game in week 7. And then an 11 catch, 149 and a touchdown against Jacksonville in week 12. He did have a 5 for 124 and a touchdown as well. So those 5 games where he went over 100 yards in each of those is literally over half of his total receiving yards. And all of those he had almost 60. So 60% of his catches were in those 5 games. And then obviously I think his touchdowns were all in those games. 1, 2, 3, 4. All but 1. 6 of his 7 touchdowns were in those 5 games. So 5 games made up his work this year, and the rest of the time we were frustrated with how he produced. So there is bounce back because he's more consistent than that with a healthy Joe Burrow playing Joe Burrow football. So to that extent, I think he's absolutely a bounce back. And we're going to see a more consistent. I mean, the targets were very, very inconsistent. We talked about Diggs getting 5 and how criminal that was. We saw back-to-back weeks where Chase only got 4 targets.
Is that early in the season?
No, that is week 13 13 and 14. Okay. And he caught 7 of them, but only had 85 yards, 83 yards. So that's criminal. We're not going to see that with Joe Burrow, especially if Higgins is not around. You will not see Chase get less than 5-6 targets very often at all. So back-to-back weeks at 4 is just ridiculous.
I agree. And I think, we'll see him. He could be up in that 140-ish target range if he's without T. Higgins. So, and I help Joe Burrow. So
he had 145 this year.
Jeez, really?
He had 145 targets, caught 100 of them exactly.
Wow.
140 then.
But again,
180.
But again, if you look at these targets in those 5 games, you've got 15 targets, 19 targets, 13 targets, 12 targets, and 12 targets. So there's 24, 37,
there you go.
56, 71 of his 145 were in 5 games. So half of his targets basically in a 5 game window.
He's on track for over 210 targets then.
Yeah. So maybe he'll have 180 next season then. 140.
Yeah. Maybe.
Over. Take the over.
I do want to add one. We talked about those top wide receivers. Garrett Wilson.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if you had anybody.
Garrett Wilson's in that bucket. Just that's all I'm going to say is Garrett Wilson is in that bucket.
We'll be talking about Garrett Wilson here soon. Anyway.
Yeah. So Garrett Wilson is. He's in a couple of different sandboxes. I left him alone for now, but yeah.
But talent-wise, we're talking talent-wise. I think he's
for the top 3. Yeah, I think we both raised our eyebrows and we're thinking the same player.
It
No,
was like
I'm
I didn't think
I'm
it was
not.
crazy, but he's
I'm not.
talent
No,
wise, he's absolutely there. What he's
Yeah.
done
he's
with
top
what he's had
five,
in Jets.
10.
Oh,
Yeah, but
he's in that
you
category.
can't go into the tier with
Talent
guys like
wise,
JJ, Chase. Talent's nothing until you have results.
If Garrett Wilson outperformed, when Aaron Rodgers plays a whole year, it would not surprise me to see Garrett Wilson outperform all three of
it
those.
wouldn't surprise me to see him be the
It
number
wouldn't
one
either.
receiver in the entire league next year.
Yeah.
It wouldn't, and then he belongs in that category. But until he
I
does,
think he's got the
he
talent.
doesn't.
I'll put him there. That's why I think Brock Bowers is my number
Yeah.
1 or 2 tight end out of all
Yeah.
tight ends too.
Yeah.
I can't go tight
Sure,
end high anymore.
if you said proven
I'm
to be top
battered,
3,
bruised,
then
and
sure.
wounded.
Yeah, if we're talking stats, then absolutely not. But if we're just talking complete skill, I think he's got every bit of it, and what he's done.
So
with
let me put it
Zach
this way:
Wilson-
you're starting an NFL organization, and you have to pick a wide receiver, and you have the first pick. Who do you take?
If I had the first pick, I'm taking Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you have the second pick. Who do you take?
I'm taking Jamar Chase personally.
And then you have the third pick. Who do you take?
I'm probably
I'll
taking
take
Garrett Wilson.
I'll take
Okay.
Garrett Wilson over CeeDee Lamb.
I'll
CeeDee
take
Lamb
Lamb,
just is
but that's cool.
Lamb's a product of his usage too. I mean, if Garrett Wilson got that amount of targets,
Talent drives targets, all right?
If you replace them,
Wait. Not every target is created equal. Let's just
Right.
get that out there right fucking now.
Sure.
Because a Zach Wilson target is not a Dak
No, it's
Prescott
not.
target.
But talent drives targets, right? To your point, Garrett Wilson is incredibly talented, and I do not argue that.
If you replaced Garrett Wilson and CeeDee Lamb, I wouldn't be surprised if Garrett Wilson did everything and more than CeeDee Lamb did this year.
I'm not there yet, but you guys could be right. I'm just not there yet.
He's about to. We're big on Garrett Wilson.
All right, so while he's ruining my takes, I'm going to transition us.
You're right.
Yeah.
We hired Alex Van Pelt, so I just wanted to make that.
Yeah, I knew you hired somebody who didn't really know what he.
I forgot.
I knew you hired somebody who didn't really know what he was doing. I just couldn't
very
remember
confusing
who it was,
hire, but we'll see. Maybe he knows something I don't, or like Gerard Mayo, which he probably does.
So
you guys are gonna run the ball a lot. Yeah.
Tyreek Hill is obviously in that conversation. We didn't even mention Tyreek Hill. You cannot.
AJ Brown is in there too. From an age perspective, he probably. But anyway,
if we're talking, Davante Adams too, right? But
he said if you're starting a franchise, he did say if you're starting a franchise.
True. So if we're talking targets,
might be Marvin Harrison.
Targets in the skill, right? Garrett Wilson was 4th in the entire league with targets with 168. So his skill is demanding targets. So
totally.
CeeDee Lamb 181.
Right. It's bonkers. I get it. And I think you could make the same argument for both teams: is who the hell else are you going to throw it to? At least Dak had a couple of options. But
what are you talking about? They brought all Rodgers dudes with him.
Brees Hall might have been the second leading receiver. Brees Hall might have been the second leading receiver.
His receivers.
The best part about that, right?
They're better in Green Bay.
The best part of that is everybody bitched, and Aaron Rodgers included, about the lack of wide receiver talent that he had in Green Bay for the last X number of years. So what did he do? He brought them all with him.
And then
made no sense.
left all the good ones back in Green Bay.
But when he got hurt and apologized to Garrett Wilson, that tells you something. Yeah. Like Garrett Wilson was about to have an insane year.
Listen, Hard Knocks does a really good job of pumping you up. Like, I got pumped up for the Raiders watching Hard Knocks, but when you watch Hard Knocks and you watch Garrett Wilson and Sauce going toe to toe, it was like, holy crap, these two are unbelievable, right? Like, it was pretty mind numbing. And then when Wilson would get the better of Sauce and vice versa, it was like, holy shit. So
we better reel her back in. We
all right. Let's hand it off to the running back category. And one guy that I personally think is poised for quite a bounce back, but I'm not sure you guys will agree, is Najee Harris. So Najee had an inflated rookie season where he finished as RB3. Then he was RB14, probably a little bit more realistic for who he is and what he does. And then Pittsburgh was kind of an offensive shit show this season, and he ended up as running back 23. I think he was 22 points per game. Rick, I'm going to start with you because I don't think you're necessarily going to agree with me on this one. But I see Najee Harris as a bounce back for a couple of different reasons. Number one, his offensive coordinator is probably going to benefit him. And I think that offense in general will be better next season. So what do you think?
We didn't like Bijan's usage, so what are we going to think about Najee?
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Bijan's usage wasn't that bad.
It wasn't consistent, though.
We bitched more about his usage than I remember bitching about anybody outside of Kyle Pitts. Like there's a common denominator in
So
Atlanta.
I guess my argument to that would be, isn't Najee Harris the Tyler Algier of the Pittsburgh Steelers?
Is that
Well,
what
yeah,
you
but
you
is
want
that
that
really a bounce
usage?
back? Is that what you
Yeah.
like?
No, but he's going to be the primary ball carrier is what I'm saying for Pittsburgh. Like I know we want Jaylen Warren to be something, but he's not.
I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I still don't think Najee Harris is an efficient runner. He was way better down the stretch. So for me, we saw a different Najee at the end of this year than we've ever seen, right? Like he's never been the dude that he was the last like 3 or 4 weeks after they got rid of Canada and then started using him and Warren pretty heavily. I just don't know if without the pass catching, I don't know if he can get back to where he was in 2021. And I don't know that the pass catching is going to come back because I do think it's going to be almost a 50-50 with him and Jaylen Warren. But again, here's the other thing that we're not factoring in. We saw his production go up when the quarterback production went up in Pittsburgh when Mason Rudolph took over, right? If they get the quarterback thing figured out, that might change everything. And that might be why we saw Najee be different down the stretch. Even when he wasn't catching a bunch of balls, right? He was getting more red zone opportunities, scoring more touchdowns, stuff that we hadn't really seen because they hadn't really done it. Plus, they started getting 400 yards in games, which they hadn't done for 9 years.
Well, they realized that the middle of the field existed.
Right. So I do see pathways to him being a top 6 guy next year, but it's tough to put to really put much into it until we see how Mr. Arthur Smith runs the offense there in Pittsburgh, because we never know who they're going to utilize and when they're going to utilize them and how much they're going to utilize them. So that is a big question mark for me, is that backfield. And do we really want either of those guys going into 2024?
Very valid. Very fair. Bryce?
I look at it like this. So the talent gap between Bijan and Tyler Algier is greater than the talent gap between Najee and Jaylen Warren. And we saw Algier get more touches than he probably should have with Bijan. Bijan's touches weren't bad. He had like 274 total touches. But if you really look at it, they weren't consistent. And then the games that he was getting more touches, he was producing with those touches. I think he only had like 2 games the entire year with over 20 carries. A guy with that talent should be getting more, especially on a team that's a major running team. He's just way more talented, way more explosive. He could take any ball to the house. And Tyler Algier's usage was eating into what could have been Bijan being a top 3 fantasy back. It wouldn't have surprised me if he could have somehow competed up there with probably not Christian McCaffrey, too much touchdown upside there, but still he could have easily been the number 2 by a wide margin, in my opinion, with the talent and usage that he could have gotten. Najee and Jaylen Warren, I don't think are that much different when it comes to overall talent-wise. Like, yeah, Najee's a bigger back, probably more useful in the goal line situations, but Jaylen Warren is way more explosive. I think he could be way more exciting in the pass game and way more exciting on the outside run game. So I don't know. I just think that the usage for those two is going to be too evenly split for Najee to be a bounce-back candidate for me. Because Jaylen Warren just has earned the right to get those touches because he's been extremely efficient with the usage and touches that he's gotten. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, those are all incredibly valid. Arthur Smith is someone that we love to crap on and we don't like, but the reality is Arthur Smith is 100,000 times the offensive coordinator that Matt Canada was, never will be, and any of the other guys that they tried to pencil in once they fired Canada. So, you look back, I look at Arthur Smith more with the Tennessee body of work, and what I see in Pittsburgh is, like if I'm ranking, Tyler Heineke, Desmond Ridder, and holy crap, I can never remember his name, Kenny Pickett, probably putting Pickett on the top of those 3, right? So he gets a bit of a quarterback upgrade. It's nothing great, but can Kenny Pickett be what Ryan Tannehill was in Tennessee and just not turn the ball over and manage the game? Yeah. He's got 2 good wide receivers. He's got a couple of good tight ends. He's got a couple of good running backs, and they're working on that offensive line. And I think Najee just finds himself in situations where he touches the ball more and he gets more precious touches in the green and the red zones and scores more. So I don't think he's running back 3 like he was in his rookie season. That was vastly inflated by receptions, in my opinion. But I do see him as a back end RB1, high end RB2 versus the RB22, 23 that he was a year ago.
So here's my question. If you took Warren, Algier, and Najee and had just those 3 in a bucket, how much is the talent gap between any of those 3?
Minuscule.
I think Najee's 1.
Okay, but
is
how
it,
big
is it a
talent
Bijan to
gap?
Algier? I don't know. How do I measure talent gap?
It's not very big, right? I mean,
right. Like you could probably switch those guys and not really blink an eye.
No, I think it depends on how you want to split it up, right? If I'm talking about carrying the football, I'll take Najee, Algier, and then Warren. And then if I'm talking about catching the football, I'll probably put Warren on top, followed by Najee and Algier. So maybe there isn't much of a gap. I don't know. But Najee Harris to me is the best running back of the 3.
Okay.
Probably.
But I don't know if he's not Bijan to Algier like Bryce was talking about earlier.
So let's just take that point, right? Because
sure,
the difference isn't that big, and you would say that with Warren, the difference isn't as big, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so this year Algier had 186 carries.
Yeah,
that is only 28 less than Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson had 214 carries to the 186 by Algier. So if their split is that close, I wouldn't be surprised if the Warren and Najee's is flipped to where Warren's got more carries and opportunities than him. So that was kind of my point, is that even with the big difference between Bijan and Algier, we saw a very small difference in actual attempts per week. Obviously the targets was different because Algier only had 23 and Bijan had 86. So that's obviously a big difference, but Bijan didn't even go for 1,000 in his rookie year, and Algier did just the year before. When we were saying the same thing about Algier's usage versus Cordarrelle Patterson's.
Sure, and I think it's load management, right? I think Arthur Smith was probably trying to protect their prize asset and was probably given directions to not give him 400 touches in his rookie season, which a lot of guys would have done.
That's tough for me if you're trying to win games, and Atlanta was
now you're not a head coach
to get into the playoffs, and if that's your plan,
one said he was a good coach.
To save the running back. Well, no, you said if they told
this isn't an Arthur Smith bounce back question. This is a Najee Harris bounce back.
I know, but why would you listen to plans that soil ruin you? Yeah, you know what I mean, and Arthur Smith doesn't look like he listens to many people.
Ask Lovie Smith. He says, no, we're not going to lose this game. If I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to lose it going out with a win.
Yeah, and I respect that. And yeah, I'm not going to try to defend Arthur Smith because it is what it is. But I guess enough Najee Harris. How about a running back that's been a top 4 running back in 3 of his last 4 seasons and finishes the RB26, and that is none other than Austin Ekeler. Now, Ekeler had a little bit of challenges with injury to start the season, and I would argue that he never really fully recovered from it. He combined that with a quarterback that was beaten and battered throughout the whole season and finished the season early. In combination with that, he was with an underperforming offensive coordinator and a head coach that seemed clueless and then soon unemployed. And maybe just the Bears' new defensive coordinator. That's a whole other story. So, Austin Ekeler. 29 years old, talking about retiring, big fantasy football guy, talk of him setting up his career after football. Is he bouncing back or is he walking away?
If he plays, I think he bounces back. I think wherever he goes, wherever he plays, they're going to throw the ball to him a lot. That's what we didn't see. There was weird stretches where they weren't throwing the ball to him. It didn't make a lot of sense. So if he comes back, obviously a team's giving him, he's probably going to get a decent contract. It's not going to be, a bajillion dollars, but for a running back, it's going to be a decent contract. And whoever brings him in is going to utilize him to catch the ball. Like, that's his strength. We've known that since he first broke out. If you're not using him that way, then especially at this point of his career, obviously he was a really good goal line back. Obviously all the touchdowns that he had for 2 years, but that also, probably with his body type, probably wears on him faster than it does Derrick Henry or one of the other free agents that are out there at his age, right? So yeah, I think that he's fine. Now, are we talking top 5 bounce back? Probably not. I think with some of the other young talent, Breece Hall, if he's healthy, and Bijan, and then with your CMCs and stuff, it's going to be hard to get into the top 5. Unless those guys get hurt, which we never want. But back to a top 12. Again, we talked about, we've seen Duke Johnson and JD McKissick, borderline RB1s just on pass catching alone. So I think he can do that. Yep. I think he can do that if he does come back, but good luck to him no matter what he decides. It would be sad in a couple of my leagues if he doesn't come back. I would have liked to move off of him first, but
plus I dig him.
But yeah, I think as long as he's utilized heavily in the pass game, which I think anybody that brings him in would have that plan, at least you would hope, he'll bounce back.
Yeah, why would you bring him in and think that he's going to carry a huge workload in the run game when he's never done that his entire career? I don't think the dude's rushed for 1,000 yards a single season his entire career.
9-15 and 9-11 and 9-15 and 21 and 22.
Right. So he's come close, but yet he hasn't got it. He's gotten all that work from the pass game. I mean, I think he has a little bounce back. I personally think the days of him being an RB1, even a top 12 running back, are over. I just find it hard to. I'm going to find it hard to believe that a team will get him and give him the same usage that he got when he was, a top 5 running back or even close to that. I mean, I'm trying to think of an organization that could acquire him and utilize him like that. And really the only one that comes front, the top of my mind that could be doing that would be like the Texans, which then I think he could be a top 10 running back again. But I just don't know how a team's going to, utilizing a guy like that and jumping it down constantly to him, whether it's screen games or whatever, because he's not going on long passes, right? And he's working a little bit in the middle of the field and some swing passes, things like that. I just don't see him getting in a situation where he gets that utilization that he got with the Chargers, and the opportunity rose for him all the time, right? Like the Chargers had those wide receivers that were constantly getting injured and things like that. So he had that opportunity to step up as like a top pass catcher for that team. So I just don't see that unique situation being put in for him. I see him having still good fantasy value as like more of a running back, a higher tier RB2 moving forward if put in the right situation. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him retire. He probably makes a lot of money streaming video games. I know he does that.
He's a talented dude. He had 20 touchdowns in 2021. He had 18 in 22, and he had 6 last year. And he missed a couple of games, but that's how he gets into the top, 3, 4. I think that, there's another place that I think makes a ton of sense for him as the Jerick McKinnon replacement in Kansas City. You let Pacheco be the main angry running guy, and you just let Ekeler come in.
But then you don't get those Ekeler goal line touchdowns that Rick was mentioning earlier. Pacheco there.
Yeah, but I don't think you need him, right? Like I'm not saying he's going to be top 1, 2, 3, 4, but if he goes to an offense like the Chiefs and catches 8 touchdowns, he's a top 12 running back. He will be, because he'll have 600 to 800 yards on the ground and probably close to 800 more through the air. Like it's like, I don't know, unless they had T. Higgins and Gabe Davis and everybody else, there's going to be a ton of passes for a guy like that. So we'll see. I don't think he retires. I sure hope he doesn't retire, mainly because I like the player. Another player I really like who fell on his face in a big bad way was Dameon Pierce. Pretty exciting rookie season that ended short due to injury. I think he finished just outside the top 24 as a rookie on a pretty crappy Houston team. So I thought this year with C.J. Stroud and all this other stuff, and that he would have a pretty good season. Well, he finished as the RB 55, and you're like, oh, he must have been injured. Well, he was RB 57 in points per game. So did we see Dameon Pierce peak as a rookie, and this is it? Or clearly he bounces back from RB55, but what does he bounce back to, Rick?
Maybe running back 54.
Really?
I've never been a Pierce guy. Singletary's, I think, clearly better than him as a running back. And I think that's where, I mean, I'll tell you what, we were just talking about Austin Ekeler. What if Houston brought in Derrick Henry and Austin Ekeler and just shored up that backfield and gave Stroud that protected running game? That would be fun, right? That could be a really fun situation. So not that I think that's going to happen, but I just don't think he's that good. I think we saw, Singletary come in and just completely take that job from him. I think if they can't get another running back, that they probably bring Singletary back, and Dameon Pierce at best is splitting with him. I just don't see we're going to see the usage we saw him get his rookie year when there was nobody else in that backfield. I mean, I think they were still using was Burkhead used 2 years ago for them with Dameon Pierce? Like,
yeah.
I mean,
Ouch.
that backfield he had a pretty good situation there with that backfield. And I don't think he's a guy. I think he's going to be one of those flash in the pans. And Pacheco is going to be that late round, waiver wire darling from that year that we thought Dameon Pierce was going to be.
Fair.
Yeah, Dameon Pierce to me is at best running back 56 next year. I think he goes back even further. I just don't. I don't think I didn't like him either. And it's hard. It's hard to like a running back that just doesn't have hardly any PPR value. I mean, there's very few that have been successful like that throughout their entire career, and that's really just Derrick Henry when it comes to the top of my line. Like, people look at Isaiah Pacheco as a guy, but he catches passes. I mean, right? So
he did this season, but he didn't coming into this season.
Right, but
I only have one on his resume, but still.
That's because Jerick McKinnon was there and healthy, and if you remember last year, Pacheco wasn't. He came on late in the year, and if you look in the playoffs, I think he caught he got just like as many targets as Jerick McKinnon last year in the playoffs. So he was kind of coming along as a pass catcher, and it's been more shored up this season. But either way, Dameon Pierce just doesn't have that upside, and to Rick's point, like, I feel like that the Texans, his rookie year, were just giving him the ball so that the clock would run and the games would end faster because they were just so bad. The games, so he was the only person to give the ball to. So let's get this season over with. Let's get our number 2.
Davis Mills is our quarterback. Let's get this shit over with, please.
Right. Dameon Pierce just doesn't have any value to me moving forward. I think he gets buried on the depth chart. I won't be surprised if the Texans are a team that acquires one of these older free agent running backs or drafts a guy, brings back Singletary. I don't know, but I just don't think Dameon Pierce is even going to be their number 2 option next year.
Yeah, I'll be adding him almost everywhere. And one of the things I like the most about him is his ability to break tackles and how he never quits on a run. And that was clearly evident in college, and that was clearly evident as in his rookie season. I don't know what happened to him last year, and I could very well be wrong. It happens lots. But if Dameon Pierce does not, I got to be careful what I say here. If he does not finish a healthy season at better than RB55, you guys name it, I'll do it.
So my question is, how do you go from that rookie year with Davis Mills, no talent on the offense, like everything being shit, and you seemingly performing well, to literally everything lines up for a running back with a quarterback, dynamic passing game? Like, they can't key on you as the running back and you completely shit the bed. That doesn't make any sense to me. If you've got the skill, that should have elevated him from what he was dealing with his rookie year to what he had his second year, which is the really, really big concern for me. Because you would have thought that would have, with the way that offense went, he would have went with it. Like, it doesn't make any sense that he didn't, unless there was some sort of injury that he just wasn't healed from. But I never heard that, and
I don't think there was, not to him. I think early in the season, I'd have to look, and this is just assumptions, that I would think that Stroud probably started a little slower and then took off around week 5 to 10 before he got hurt. So I think there might have been that. I do know that Houston's offensive line was incredibly banged up and hurt early in the season and didn't get healthy until later on. Now, you also have a regime change, right? And this might not bode well for me. Is the coach changed, the GM changed, everybody changed. Some guys like blondes, some guys like brunettes, right? So maybe Dameon Pierce is an asshole. Like, I don't know anything about this stuff, but at the end of the day, Dameon Pierce to me is a talented running back, and I think that he gets better than he was. I don't think he's a top 24 running back, but I think he's a nice buy low guy to put on your roster that's lands somewhere in that running back 3 that you can flex once in a while.
Do you know how many what his average yards per attempt were?
Oh, probably under 4.
You said under 4?
Yeah.
What if I told you it was under 3?
I believe you because you're looking at it.
2.87.
Oh, that's close.
What was it the year before?
He never had a game this season over 3.5 yards per rush. Not one single
one good game, didn't he?
Not one game was. Let's see. He had an 81-yard game.
That was his best game, eh?
Yeah, 24 carries to get there.
That's a lot of
24 carries, 81 yards, no touchdowns, 3.38 per carry. Was his best game of the year. Now he did have touchdown or 2 touchdowns, but one game, 14 yards for 31, 14 attempts for 31. Back-to-back games, 15 for 31, 14 for 31, 1 touchdown. He actually had more targets than you would have thought.
He's trying to get his yards and number the same.
Yeah. It's tough to see somebody literally not have a single game where they hit 4 yards per carry.
Played well.
And Singletary was
and he did, but it was a little bit later. Singletary started extremely slow as well. So you're not wrong. I just it's a bounce back conversation, and he's not going to be running back 55.
He's going to bounce back to 60.
He's going to
bounce backwards.
He's a bounce backwards. Ah, damn it! You beat me to it. Bounce backwards. Okay, so looking at our boy Singletary, averaged 4.16. He only had 4 touchdowns as well. He actually, receiving wise, didn't get a lot more work than Pierce did in his games either. So neither of them really do a bunch of that. Total of 50 targets combined, I think. So yeah, there's I just don't know. I think that's just they're gonna address that position, I think, because
I agree.
You've got the quarterback now. Now you're just trying to continue building out that offense and have that solid running game to be able to shut shit down when you do have the lead late in games.
Yeah, Singletary's free agent as well. So if they're going to replace somebody on that roster, it's going to be him. So I think Pierce, no reason to get rid of him, unless Bryce is the head coach. So I guess we'll see what happens. But
they could bring They could bring
15,
in multiple free agents, though.
15 minutes on Dameon Pierce is too long.
They could be a team that drafts a guy, too.
I'm moving from one free agent running back in Singletary to another in Josh Jacobs. Led the NFL in rushing last season, or probably I should say the season before last, because this one is just concluded. And he was running back 3 in fantasy, and this year he finished as running back 28. He had a massive decline in touches, in efficiency, in a whole bunch of categories. But I do think that he is a running back that's going to land in a favorable position. Last week I had him going to Miami when we talked about free agents. I think this is way too good of a running back and too talented of a player to just fade away. So I'll let you guys tell me I'm wrong again and have at her.
No, I think you're spot on with this one. This seems like an easy bounce back candidate for me. Josh Jacobs, still relatively young, free agent. It's going to be interesting to see where he lands and see what maybe money he demands, because I know that was an issue with a lot of these running backs last year, and I believe he was one of the ones that got tagged.
Yep.
So we'll see, but I mean, I think he could take a lot of usage. He's more than likely going to land on a team with higher touchdown upside than the one he was just on. So yeah, I think he's definitely a bounce back candidate. He was injured a lot this year, which led the way for Zamir White to be productive in his absence, which I think he's going to be stepping in as the Raiders' #1 running back next year because they have so many needs. It doesn't make sense to fill running back, in my opinion. So Josh Jacobs might find himself in a decent spot on a contending team that has a lot more touchdown upside moving into 2024.
Agree.
Yeah, for me, it's for all these running backs that are free agents this year. It's a benefit to them that the draft isn't as good as it was for running back as last year was, right?
Yeah.
When you have
Yep.
we had two guys
Very
going
true.
to top 12, so from a free agent standpoint, people aren't going to be able to find that dude, or they're not going to feel as comfortable that they're going to find that dude in the draft as they were last year. So I think that helps him. But again, for Jacobs, the key is landing in a spot that's going to continue doing what they've done a little bit more the past 2 years with him, and that is passing him the ball, throwing him the ball, right? That helps him from the fantasy perspective, getting some more targets. So hopefully he'll continue getting used like that. We didn't see that early in his career nearly as much. So for him to bounce back, I think he just has to find that spot that will utilize him as the pass catcher out of the backfield that we've seen him be capable of doing. He has some drops too, but yeah. So I think that's just the biggest key with Jacobs. Because he's probably not going to be a 300 carry guy anymore either.
Has he ever been?
Yeah, he was, I think, the year that he was #1.
Because even his usage back in college, but he had a Hall of Fame backfield that he shared with back then. But it's like his touches have been low his entire career. So
yeah, actually, so he got 340 in 2022. 2020 was 273.
393 total touches in 22.
Yeah, he about hit that.
He almost hit that scary number, right?
He was just barely below that, and we saw the dip. It keeps coming true whenever people get close to that 400 number, but we're not going to dig into that because we could go.
I have the Kyle Pitts tattoo of shame. You have the 400 touch badge of honor. It's a little different.
Hey, I have shames too, man. Jaylen Rager.
Cam Akers is my shame.
Yeah.
Cam Akers is another one of mine.
Poor guy.
Maybe he'll be sweet for you guys next year, Sully.
Well, he's not going to play for us next year. He's going to be driving an Uber if he can push the gas pedal down without hurting himself. But anyway, I think that Rick makes a really good point about the running back position this season, and I think that when you look at who's out there as a free agent, this could be a weird, almost reset the running back market kind of offseason, because all it takes is two teams to want Austin Ekeler or Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs or Derrick Henry. Combine that with a little bit lackluster draft class, at least what the pundits say it is. And one guy that might have kickstarted it and started to reset the running back market before it even reset, or if it has reset at all, is Jonathan Taylor. And Jonathan Taylor had a miserable season last year. He was hurt in training camp. Well, it goes back even further. Previous season, he gets hurt, still hurt coming into training camp, goes on the pup, comes off the pup, shares with Zach Moss, which I don't understand, for multiple weeks, then gets the role, and then he gets hurt again, and then he's into the offseason. So, long story short, he finishes his RB33. I think this is safe to say this is probably the most obvious running back bounce back candidate that we have.
Yeah, for me, Jonathan Taylor is one of the top 3 most talented running backs in the league. It's not a question of talent, it's a question of usage and health. And with Anthony Richardson coming back in, we talked about the RPO offenses last week where it'd be fun to watch Justin Fields with Derrick Henry or Saquon or Jalen Hurts with one of those guys. It would be fun to watch Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor in that backfield for an entire season. Obviously, Richardson only played 4 games, so they didn't really play it all together, did they? I don't think they played it all together because Taylor came back week 6 or 7 or something.
Yeah, and Richardson went down week 4.
So we haven't even seen them play together. I think they're both going to make each other better, and I would not be surprised. maybe a little bit surprised just because of what CMC keeps doing, and 49ers offense is probably still going to be pretty good next year. But I wouldn't be surprised if Jonathan Taylor ended up the running back 1 at the end of the season.
Yeah, there's 4 guys I think that separate themselves from the rest of the running backs when you really talk about any format, and that's Bijan. Well, I guess you could probably put Jahmyr Gibbs in there too, but
Yeah, you have to now. He's good.
yeah, with the expected usage, but these other 4 I think are easily going to get all the usage, and that's Brees, Bijan, Christian McCaffrey, and Jonathan Taylor, right? They're the guys that get all the touches. David Montgomery's still going to be involved more than likely next year, especially in goal line work. Even though that's changed, it's not the same as it was with Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift was. But either of those 4 guys to me are top 4 assets. The 3 younger ones being more valuable in a dynasty format. And honestly, one of the things that I think benefits. We didn't see it yet, but I think we'll see it next year. And Anthony Richardson getting hurt probably is going to benefit Jonathan Taylor moving forward, because I think the Colts are going to be a little bit more cautious in his run usage, especially in the goal, because that seems like where he was taking all his big hits were right there in the red zone inside the 5-yard line, when he was just putting his body on the line for that touchdown. And I think that they're going to take a more Justin Fields-like approach with Anthony Richardson and give that running back and Jonathan Taylor more of the work inside the 10 and 5-yard line moving forward this upcoming season. It's going to be huge because now defenses are going to have to key on Anthony Richardson because he has that ability to run the ball. And we're going to see that huge production in Jonathan Taylor. He's a huge guy that I'm looking forward to having the biggest bounce back candidate, because, he was running back, 30 something, and he could easily be RB1 next season.
It's going to be better than Dameon Pierce. I'll say that right now.
That's for sure. Yeah, I think he could get hurt.
My biggest concern.
I'm glad you're on board with this, Sully.
He could be hurt for 14 weeks and still end up better than Dameon Pierce.
Tap that. Tap that.
Plays 3 games and outscores Dameon Pierce in 15.
Tap that takedown, MFers. My only concern with Jonathan Taylor is Anthony Richardson, and it's not a talent thing. It's kind of what Bryce was talking about. Can Anthony Richardson learn to get down and know that he's not Josh Allen? Because in college, Anthony Richardson just ran over everybody, and I think that was a big of an eye-opener in college. So I'll kind of quickly go through a couple of quarterbacks. I'll start with Kyler Murray. I think that Kyler, to me, already bounced back in a bit of a way, in a way, coming back from his ACL. There was a ton of concern. But the reason I put him on this list is he finished strong with almost nobody to throw the football to, right? Like Marquise Brown was hurt. Thank you, Trey McBride, for stepping up. Michael Wilson, who looks like a decent talent, was inconsistent and injured at times. But, Marvin Harrison Jr. is a type of guy that could easily go to Arizona. If he doesn't, I think Neighbors does. I think Arizona is clearly going to take a wide receiver with that pick. And Kyler's a way better quarterback than I think a lot of people give him credit for being, especially in the passing game. So, he's been a perennial top 10 quarterback when healthy. I think he bounces back into that range again next year. What about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you got a mobile quarterback like him who came back from his ACL and looked just as good, if not a little bit better, running the ball.
Yeah.
And this team, they got a huge tight end that stepped up with Trey McBride. He was extremely impressive this year. Marquise Brown is also not suited to be a team's number 1 wide receiver, and that's what he was kind of put in the position to do this year. So that's a tough ask for him, even if he was healthy. They have to address wide receiver. They could be a team that also looks to get a guy like T. Higgins, any of these free agent wide receivers that are out there this year, prime landing spot. The Cardinals are one of those teams that could be like one of the bottom of the, drafting early to potentially drafting in a playoff spot next year. And I think Kyler Murray, I used to be down on him, and you've convinced me, through Facebook a lot of times and other discussions.
He's your Aaron Jones.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm on the train. I've kind of invested in him through his injury this past season, and he came back and looked really impressive. So he's a very good bounce back candidate and a good enough quarterback to definitely lead this team to the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't have anything to really add. I've always liked Kyler Murray. I hated the horizontal offense that Cliff Kingsbury ran there for basically a year and a half with Kyler, with Kyler's injuries and stuff, and then obviously Kingsbury getting canned. But But yeah, if he needs that number one. We've seen him with Hopkins. He was great with Hopkins. He needs that number one that he can rely on. And then I agree. Hollywood Brown, I think, would be a great number two on a team. He's always been the number one, basically, and I think he needs that alpha guy on the offense to help him out. So again, if the Bears do go with Caleb Williams, I think Arizona is a spot that we could see Marvin Harrison go to, especially if one of those offensive tackles goes, number 3 to the Patriots or something. So I definitely think that. Well, I'm just saying, if
I just want that to happen. I just like chaos.
Or if it goes Caleb, Daniels, then May, or in any order of whatever that is, right? Then Marvin Harrison's going to be there, and Kyler's going to have a new big guy. Now, if you don't want to wait till then because you're at 4 and you're not sure Marvin Harrison's going to drop to 4, you could still take Neighbors at 4. I don't think that's crazy out of line. I think Neighbors is really, really good as well. I have Neighbors a little bit ahead, but
I don't think there's as much drop off from Marvin Harrison Jr. to Neighbors as most people think. Don't get me wrong, Marvin Harrison Jr. is clearly the top guy in this draft, but I don't think it's a off the cliff drop.
Marvin,
I think those two are the top guys.
I think that by the time we're done with this draft process, I think people are going to look at Marvin Harrison Jr. as a prospect in the range of the Calvin Johnsons, Julio Jones, the really, really top end wide receiver prospects of all time. I think he is going to be considered one of those 4. So I do think there's a pretty big gap. I don't want to say pretty big, right? But when you get up here to the top echelon, the difference, like just this big of a difference, can be a huge difference over the course of a career.
I just think the drop from 1 to 2 to 3 and 4 is catastrophically larger than it is from 1 to 2. That's all.
Yeah, I can't really say, because really those 3 with O'Dunes are really the only ones. Igbuke I was familiar with, but he went back, so he's not going to be in this class. So I don't think O'Dunes is that much different than Neighbors either, but it's going to be real interesting to see. I also like Keon Coleman a lot. He's not as fluid as those guys, but we'll see where he finishes. Either way, Arizona's going to address wide receiver this year. They've got their tight end. They're
going to double address it. I think they address it in free agency and the draft.
Yeah. They could. They definitely could. They can't wait. They're not in a spot to wait for the draft unless they're planning on trading up for MHJ. So I think they have to address it in the free agency as well. So it'll be interesting to see what they do.
They could also do it. They can also do it twice in the first round, because don't they have Houston's first round pick?
Well, they could trade back too. It wouldn't surprise me if they feel like they're in a good spot.
They got Houston's first. They could. That could be a good team to watch in a bit here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they got Houston's first from Houston trading up for Will Anderson, right? That trade.
Yeah, everybody
ended up being a really good trade for Houston, because I was.
It did, and at the time, but at the time it was like, holy crap, Arizona might have the top 2 picks in the draft next year, right?
Yeah,
but it didn't work out that way. But,
right.
So I think we agree on Kyler. I think we'll agree on the next guy, who's also probably a quick conversation. That's Joe Burrow, injured in the preseason, which seems like it's what he does every year. Struggled to get going, finally got going, and had the weirdest of all season-ending injuries of a long list of quarterbacks that happened this season. Ended up finishing way down at quarterback 25. Even if T. Higgins leaves and they don't do anything to that position, I think there's enough weapons with Chase and other underlying and supporting cast that Joe Burrow bounces back. And he's probably not a top 4 quarterback, but I think he's comfortably a top 8 quarterback.
Yeah, with top four upside, of course. I mean, it's hard to be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy when you don't have a lot of rushing upside, of course. But he has that ability to be up in that range nonetheless. Yeah, they just got to protect that man. I mean, I don't know what they need to do, whether they try and trade up in the draft for one of these top tackles that fall further than they should just because of the QB and wide receiver talent that's in this draft. Like, I mean, if you take these tackles and put them in last year's draft or the year before, I should say, like when Kenny Pickett was the first quarterback taken, these two tackles are probably top 5 picks. Right.
If you didn't have, just for that point, if you didn't have Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison in this draft, you're probably getting people saying that they would take a Joe Alt or a Fashanu at number 1,
right?
In that situation. So just to make your point, like I agree with you 100%.
These guys are already, like, some people are saying that these guys will come into the league and be Pro Bowlers year 1. That's how good they are.
Yeah, they're both really good.
It's way easier, and people don't realize it's way easier to scout offensive linemen than any other position in the NFL because, like, so much of their scouting is their technique. I mean,
I bet the Bengals would argue with that.
Well, I guess so. But what offensive linemen are they really drafting? Spending like top draft picks on? Like, usually, how many bust first or second offensive linemen are you finding in the NFL? Like,
very few.
Very few. They're easier to scout. And then they're more surefire. They're probably the next two surefire things after Marvin Harrison Jr. I would guess.
I would argue that. I would argue with you 100% that those tackles are probably the next two safest plays in this draft.
Yeah. So whatever team takes them is going to be happy with it. So they could be a team that gets up there, but Joe Burrow's got to get protected. Like, that's that's the downfall. It's not his downfall. It's the downfall that's getting put on him. So as long as they can keep that man protected, even losing T. Higgins, it's not really a huge decrease in value because they also could be a team that, like Hollywood Brown, I think that'd be a great landing spot for him, would be the Bengals, and they probably wouldn't have to pay too much money for him as well. So, yep, Joe Burrow's an easy one. He's got all the talent, just got to stay healthy.
I agree 100%. Unfortunately for Cincinnati, like if offensive line is really what they want to address, this is a deep offensive line draft as well. So, there's going to be really good center prospects going late second, third round. Left tackles are going to go into the second round, like high end guys that would be probably first rounders in most drafts. So, they can definitely address the offensive line this offseason. And if they do that, then I completely agree. If they don't, and they lose both Higgins and Tyler Boyd and all that continuity that they've built, I think we could see kind of a backwards year from what we expect. And I say that because last year there were reasons why it was a bad year for them. Burrow was hurt, like Rob said, coming in. I think even with a fully healthy Burrow and Chase next year, if they lose both of those receivers and they can't really find the guy to fit in with to replace those, and they don't get that offensive line figured out, I think it could be another QB 10-ish, 12-ish year because he doesn't have that rushing upside. But if they do fix that finally, then him and Jamar Chase can do damage just by themselves. All they need is time. If they would have had that little bit of time, they probably win the Super Bowl, right? So that's been the difference there in Cincy, has been that offensive line. And if they can get that figured out this year, then Joe Burrow he'll be fine and he'll definitely have a bounce back. But there's a lot riding on that, and a lot riding on. I don't think they can let Higgins and Boyd go, right? Just out of continuity, like that would mess up your entire passing game.
It depends on how you feel about what's behind them, and I can never remember Andre. Yeah, he looks okay.
Or whatever.
I can't remember how to say his last name, and then there's some guys, but yeah, I think that they have the ability to address the O-line early, and then the depth of the wide receiver position probably helps them out. There's some free agents that are out there. I don't necessarily think Marquise Brown is the answer, but it's not a bad suggestion. We'll see what happens. There's a ton of free agent wide receivers this year as well that are all like not elite, but they could be Batman to Chase being, or Robin to Chase being Batman.
Yeah,
right?
You don't have to find the elite guy. You just need to find the Robin. You're
find a guy that you can't leave wide open like MVS. And shit, it could be MVS. Might be MVS. It might be Gabe Davis. Guys like that, right? So they're all out there and available. Two more guys I want to talk about. One guy I think is a little bit more of a conversation than the other, and I'll start with that individual, and it's Justin Herbert in Los Angeles. I'm still a believer in Justin Herbert and the talent. He just has to stay healthy. we've got quite a big change coming to that organization in terms of quarterback play. Mike Williams is probably leaving that organization just due to cap reasons. We'll see what they do with their rather elite draft position. But, Justin Herbert, I think, is still one of the top young quarterbacks in the league, but he finishes quarterback 17 for a bunch of different reasons. Broke a bone in his hand, on his non-throwing hand. Gets hit more than a pinata some weeks and ended up finishing his season short. But he was quarterback 13 in points per game that he did play, which I think is a low bar for him, and I think he bounces back in more to the top 6 to 8 like Burrow range. How about you guys?
Yeah, I would say Justin Herbert is, again, I think he's overrated, but if his coach thinks that J.J. McCarthy could be the first off the board in this draft, then I can't imagine what he thinks of Justin Herbert. He must think that Justin Herbert could win 9 Super Bowls in his career, if that's what he thinks of J.J. McCarthy. So, that being said, if your quarterback has that much faith in you, he's probably going to let you sling it around a little bit. They've got the wide receivers. Keenan Allen was still really good this year for the most part. He is getting up there, so he could fall off a cliff at any time. Mike Williams is going to be back, which is a huge upgrade over Quentin Johnston as your number 2. You got Palmer, who had some nice stretches. So the weapons are there. We're going to see them probably change a lot of stuff because of the new coaching staff. Harbaugh's going to want to put his stamp on this team. So what we're going to see them do, I'm not sure, but I'm sure they're going to try to do a lot this offseason. So bounce back, yeah, because he's probably not gonna be QB 13, but I do agree, probably QB 8-ish in there, especially maybe even worse. Maybe it is 10 to 12 range, and maybe it's still considered a bounce back because maybe Caleb Williams does come in and has a rookie year like CJ Stroud or Drake May, or we see some of these other guys. Obviously, Joe Burrow wasn't there because he missed time, so maybe he jumps ahead of him. So I think there's a lot of factors in with him, but I mean, I think he's good. I just don't think he's the great quarterback everybody thinks he is. So I definitely see a bounce back, but I wouldn't put him. I don't see very many QB2 years in Herbert's future. Again, the running, but he's going to have one of those 40 touchdown passing years to do that, I think. So I don't think it's high end bounce back, but I do think it's a bounce back.
Yeah, I think Justin Herbert has the ability to be every type of fantasy quarterback that Dak Prescott is. I think they're both not the guy for a real organization to put him over the hump, but they have the arm talent. If you get the right weapons around them, that they can score a lot of fantasy points for you. I just question their decision making and their ability to be good in clutch moments, which doesn't really matter for fantasy production. So the only concern for me is what will the talent be around him moving into next season. I mean, I'm going to give Quentin Johnston a shot. I'm not too big on him. Maybe Harbaugh doesn't like him because of what he did to him in the bowl game in the college football playoffs 2 years ago. So maybe he benches him.
I don't think he likes him because he can't catch. I think that's probably part of it.
He ripped Michigan a new one when they played in that college football playoffs. He ain't
ripping anybody a new one other than maybe his future earnings.
Well,
I can't run and catch at the same time.
So some guys struggle their first couple of years at running and catching the ball. We saw it with Davante Adams and CeeDee Lamb. Maybe he can do that. He's got the body type, right?
I don't know if I saw CeeDee Lamb struggle that.
CeeDee Lamb led the league in drops, I believe, his rookie year.
Sure, but he also had a shit ton of catches.
He might be like second or third in drops right now since he's entered the league. Probably hard to beat.
Yeah, but he had 180 targets last year, and he's probably had 150 and 180 the year before.
Jerry Rice led the league in drops a lot. Terrell Owens led the league in drops a lot because they got targeted so freaking much. So
fair
the only way Quentin Johnston and CeeDee Lamb belong in the same conversation is if you're saying these guys are wide receivers. That's the only way.
But one thing Quentin Johnston and CeeDee Lamb also have in common is that once Quentin Johnston does have the ball in his hands. Well, yeah. Once Quentin Johnston does have the ball in his hands, he's pretty electric. We have to give him that. He did it all in college. He didn't really get a ton of opportunity this year as a rookie, but I try not to.
I wonder why.
Too much into rookies.
Because the hard part's getting the ball in your hands.
If he only had opportunity, right? Like if Quentin Johnson only had the opportunity of the guy that he was supposedly drafted to replace got hurt maybe early in the season, and he could slide right into that position. If that only happened for him, oh wait, it did.
Well, it's
He's
not
trash.
it's not like anybody and everybody on that team were struggling. Austin Ekeler struggled the whole year as well. I mean, Keenan Allen was hit and miss here and there as well, and I guess Mike Williams always has been.
Keenan Allen wasn't hit and miss until he got hurt. And,
I mean,
Herbert got hurt.
He was missing near the end of the year quite a bit. So
yeah, Herbert was hurt.
Wide receiver 2 until he got hurt.
Yeah.
Didn't he hurt his non-throwing hand?
I'm just looking at Quentin Johnson's numbers.
He's a rookie. Hey, listen, it's okay. We'll
give him 7 targets in 1 week.
What did he?
Caught 5 of them for 52 yards.
It's not bad, right?
3 for 4 for 91.
He didn't do as like god awful as we all wanted. Well, you guys wanted him to do, I guess. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, he did. He did
awful.
Exactly what I thought he was going to do. He's awful.
Hey, he's a body catcher, and you can't be a body catcher in the NFL.
When Josh Palmer is blowing up, and
Josh Palmer's been a great replacement wide receiver for Mike Williams since he's got hurt, since he's entered the league. Let's get that straight. I think Josh Palmer's underrated. I should put him on my next.
Gerald Everett was a better pass catching option for the Chargers than QJ.
We'll see next year. Okay, you got to build around your young guys, and you didn't draft him in the first round and not give him more than 1 year of opportunity, right? So he's going to get the opportunity next year, whether we like it or not. He's probably going to get the opportunity,
unless you can the entire organization that drafted him first last year.
I guess, but maybe Harbaugh wants to make him look good. So he said he got beat by a really, really good wide receiver in the college football playoffs.
I don't think Jim Harbaugh gives a shit about
Justin Herbert's going to have to throw the ball to Justin Herbert's going to have to throw the ball to somebody to put up bounce back numbers. Okay, well maybe it's Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen's getting old enough where he's got to be.
I do think Mike Williams. I do think Mike Williams is gone.
Keenan Allen had 150 targets in 12 games.
Yeah. Well, Keenan Allen's production is eventually going to start declining, whether we like it or not. I don't want it to happen, obviously, but
no, I do agree with that.
But I think Keenan Allen and
but I also
think Josh Palmer
at straws with the whole Jim Harbaugh trying to make Quentin Johnson.
That was just a joke. That's just a joke. But the organization drafted him in the first round, nonetheless. I understand Jim Harbaugh wasn't the coach for that, but he's going to get.
Jaylen Reagor went in the first round too.
Yes,
and had a better rookie season.
True, but Jaylen Reagor also had a lot less talent around.
I don't know.
I might need to look. I might need to look that up. I need to look that up, but I don't have time right now. But I'm going to look that one up for sure.
I'm looking it up right now. I'll tell you.
I doubt it.
Jaylen Reagor, 2020, had 396 yards and 1 touchdown on 54 targets.
He had to beat that. Johnson had to beat that. But Jaylen Reagor was also the best wide receiver on his team that year.
QJ finished with 38 catches on 67 targets for 431 yards and 2 scores.
He beat him. There we go. See? So.
No.
What did Davante Adams do his first year?
Well, Reagor did all that in 11 games, and Quentin did all that in 17.
Yeah, and Davante Adams wasn't a first round.
Reagor was on the field all the time compared to Quentin Johnston. There wasn't veteran presences there.
There's a reason for that, though.
There. Yeah, well, who was the number 2 receiver that year for the
Philly
Eagles? Yeah.
Oh, it was
who was the number 2 receiver?
The guy who got cut by a bunch of
Zach Pascal.
Aguilar.
Oh, Aguilar.
And who's the guy? Who was the guy that was a Packer and a Lion, and it was good? He was like a fantasy stud for 3 weeks, and then he was gone. That guy.
Travis Fulgham?
Yeah.
Yes.
There you go. So there's a little bit less competition. More opportunity for targets, I should say.
Okay, so if
who's a
we're
quarterback?
saying this,
was Hurts a quarterback?
Hurts was for Reagor's last year, not in 2020 though.
No, it would have been.
So it would have been what?
Year would have been Wentz and Foles combo probably, or something like that. Yeah, that's neither here nor there. Quentin Johnston should not have had competition. He should have been fine. He got more targets than Reagor got in his rookie year. But Quentin Johnston ain't the guy. Justin Herbert's going to need some more help if they don't have Mike Williams, and with Keenan Allen, with his age, if he regresses. Justin Herbert's going to need a number one wide receiver.
They're going to need a running back to establish a
what.
run game, first off. They're going to have to establish a run game. That's going to be probably the number one, especially if he's getting
But that's what Jim Harbaugh does better than anything, right? Like, that's the one knock that maybe that you can put on Herbert is that, there's talk of Greg Roman potentially being Harbaugh's OC. That ain't great. But you look at what he's done with the running game, what he did in San Francisco right out of the gate with the running game, right? Like,
right.
Harbaugh wins, and he wins by controlling the football and controlling the clock, and he's done that everywhere he's been. So, I think that's potentially a knock is, Herbert's probably not thrown for 5,000 yards, right? But I'm just pulling up last week's sheet of looking at free agent wide receivers that could go there. Calvin Ridley could go there. Marquise Brown could go there. Gabe Davis, Curtis Samuel, Tyler Boyd, all guys that will help and wouldn't break the bank. I don't think the other guys that we talked about, like Mike Evans or Michael Pittman, are going anywhere. So, or at least not there. So, we'll see. I got one more guy, and then I'll stop hammering on all this bounce back stuff. And that guy still has a game to play. So, that's Patrick Mahomes. And normally you wouldn't think of Patrick Mahomes needing to bounce back, that he's arguably one of the best guys out there all the time. But the reality is he had a pretty lackluster season in general this year. And that team kind of won with the defense, kind of won with the running game. I think he finished as quarterback 12 or 13 in points per game in fantasy, which is unlike him, I think he was a QB1 last year and the QB4 the couple of years before that. Might be a stupid question, but did Patrick Mahomes bounce back?
Yeah.
I'll let Bryce go on this one.
Yeah, he was lackluster. I mean, they had the number 3 seed, right? I mean, it's not. I don't think it's crazy to say that he had a lackluster year when that team's expected to be the number 1 and they end up being the number 3 seed in the NFL playoffs. And he and Travis Kelce were pretty disappointing throughout the entire regular season year, outside of a couple of weeks here and there. But I'll say that he's going to have a bounce back year for a couple of reasons. The main one is the wide receiver position, and I don't necessarily think they have to go out and get a top dog. I think Rashee Rice is stepping up to be that guy. I mean, what do you expect out of a rookie wide receiver, right? Walking into this, especially when you drafted, was he a late first round pick or was he a second round pick?
Second.
He was a second round pick, and he's stepping up very nicely as this team's number 1. He's had multiple weeks with over 100 yards. He's going into the playoffs playing as he's putting up performances of a true alpha number 1 wide receiver for them. I think
he's wilted a little bit in the playoffs.
Has he? I think he just had a huge week. I mean, he just went. Did he not go nuts this last week?
I don't know. You keep talking. I'll look.
He might not have found the end zone, but I think he had quite a few catches and
I think he did find the end zone, right?
I don't know if he did this past week. He might have. I know Kelce did, and I thought Pacheco did. And I don't know if they scored more than 17 points.
He had 8 receptions for 46 yards this
okay. What about against the Bills?
Buffalo was just 4 for 47.
Okay, so maybe
it's Kelce in the playoffs, right? Kelce's gone crazy.
It's been Rashee Rice throughout the regular part of the season.
Yep. But he's literally caught 12 of his 13 targets, though. He's the most reliable receiver.
Right.
I would challenge that he's a number 1 wide receiver. I think he falls in line more like the conversations we had about Marquise Brown and T. Higgins. Fair. But nonetheless, he's stepped up and performed incredibly well for Kansas City when they needed him the most.
Right now, he's falling in that category. But I mean, if he's falling in it right now, he could easily be. He could easily be in a number 1 wide receiver conversation the following year if he keeps progressing in this offense, which he's done. When you see a guy that starts off slow and he's just getting better and getting better and getting better and getting better, that's a really good news. Hopefully, it rolls into the next season and he can continue that pathway. And maybe the Chiefs just find themselves in a situation where they just need to find a number 2 wide receiver, because that's really what it's been for them this year, right? They haven't had 2 wide receivers step up. I feel like Rashee Rice, especially the second half of the season, has done his part and has done his thing. It's guys like Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Justin Watson, and it's not their fault. They're not really suited to step up in that position. They seem like they're wide receiver 3 guys anyway. So they need a second option outside of Kelce, or I guess I should say a third option outside of Rashee Rice and aging Travis Kelce. So with that being said, it seems like they're starting to put it all together. We're seeing it here in the playoffs. We saw it kind of near the end of the season. I think that Pat Mahomes comes back into the next year back as like a more consistent fantasy producer.
Yeah, going back to Rashee Rice, It's hard for me not to think he doesn't have the potential to be a true number one. 102 targets in his rookie year for 79 receptions and 938 yards. He is a red zone threat, 7 touchdowns. And going through the first 10 weeks, he only had 2 weeks with more than 5 targets. And then you see him hit that Raiders game, and then it's 10, 9, 10, 9, 12, 6, 12, 4 in that Buffalo game, and then 9 again last week. So it's the progression you want to see from a rookie wide receiver during their rookie season is, obviously starts out a little bit slow, and then as the season goes, it just progressively gets better. So it's hard for me not to see the potential for him to continue on that path going into next year. When over half of his targets were probably in the last 6 regular season games. So for me, though, it's where is the Kansas City team at? Because Patrick Mahomes is going to adapt to however that year's team's built, right? That's what we're finding out about Patrick Mahomes right now, is that he is going to adapt to whatever weapons he has. And we've seen him go from a quarterback that was throwing deep a lot to a quarterback that is in the bottom 5 in the entire NFL in average yards per attempt. And he's just going to do whatever it is that's best for the Chiefs. And he's good enough to adapt to any of those situations. So from an NFL standpoint, I think he's just going to be great every year. It's just going to depend on year to year what they need from him to take that offense to where they need to go. Obviously, if we think Rashee Rice is even going to progress, even if he's not the number one, but if he just does what he did in the second half of this year, then that's going to help Mahomes to have that for a full season when you didn't have that at all for the first 10, 12 weeks of the year until he really took that jump. So, there's no question. Patrick Mahomes, best quarterback in the league. Any one of us, if we were starting our franchise, the first guy that we would pick is Patrick Mahomes, I would have to assume. I don't think any of us are going a different direction. So,
real quick, dynasty wise, where will you rank him right now?
I still think he's the number one quarterback in dynasty, but I can see arguments for Josh Allen, Lamar, and that's about it. And that's because both those run. I think you're going to get more consistent production from Mahomes for a longer period of time. So I may, like next year, I may want Josh Allen more just because of how Kansas City's constructed it that year. But if Rashee Rice ends up turning into the next Tyreek Hill, then we're seeing probably a Mahomes that can go for the 5,500 yards again with 45 touchdowns and all of that. So I think it just matters how the Chiefs are built. They're built to win every year because they've got Mahomes. It's just how can that translate into offensive passing production from season to season? Which leads us into the big game. It's Super Bowl. It's hard to believe that this year is going to be coming to an end. I don't have any specific points. I just figured might as well talk about the Super Bowl a little bit, get some picks in. Who's going to thrive? You got any guys you think are going to score that touchdown? And for any of the betting stuff or just who do you think wins? First off, let's just start there. Bryce, who wins the Super Bowl? You're muted.
Mute.
Still muted.
I think the Chiefs win by at least 2 scores.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah. So like if you look at the Niners' path to the Super Bowl, they arguably played the weakest defenses in the playoffs. The Packers defense wasn't very good, and then the Lions defense was probably the worst. I mean, they were letting 300 plus yards to every single quarterback they were playing against, essentially. And it's going to be and I think the Chiefs had the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but they played probably arguably a top 3 defense with the Ravens last week. And, their offense didn't put up a crazy amount of points, but they got acclimated to playing against a tough defense, where I think the Niners are going to struggle going against a really tough defense. in the play in that playoffs. And then experience is another thing. I mean, the Chiefs' whole roster, essentially outside of like Rashee Rice, has now playoff and Super Bowl experience. So I'll take that. I always take the better quarterback, and then I usually take the better defense. And now when you compile the better quarterback and the better defense, I think they take this game rather easily. I think it might surprise people a little bit, but the old saying is defense wins championships, and I know the Niners got themselves a good defense as well, but I think the Chiefs defense this year it's arguably the best defense in the NFL.
Listen, I looked at the end of we were talking about just Mahomes and that whole situation. The Bears averaged as many points as the Chiefs did pretty much for the year this year. The difference is the Chiefs, and this was with a couple games ago, we're averaging giving up like 17 points per game. So when you talk about their defense is really fucking good. It definitely is. So their defense can play with anybody for sure.
Yep.
I think last week we watched the Baltimore Ravens defense play arguably the best half of football I've ever seen in my life, and the Ravens still couldn't come back and win that football game. So, and that speaks to the Chiefs defense, in my opinion, is Patrick Mahomes may have lost Tyreek Hill and he may have lost elite Travis Kelce, but he's never had a defense like this before. And I think that is ultimately why Kansas City is going to win this football game. I do not think that Kansas City will win by multiple scores because I don't think they can put up enough points on San Francisco to do that. I still think Brock Purdy is functional. I still think that, it's funny to me that Patrick Mahomes is likely, in my opinion, going to win the Super Bowl with the second best offense on the field in that game. Like the San Francisco 49ers have a much better offense, in my opinion, than the Kansas City Chiefs. I think experience, to your point, is a huge call, and I think it's Andy Reid versus Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan still has that monkey on his back where he pees down his legs at the biggest times. He's the offensive coordinator of 28-3. He could have kneeled the ball down for the last 6 possessions and won the Super Bowl, but they didn't. So nonetheless, I just think it's a close game. I think Kansas City prevails because Kansas City typically does. And I really feel bad for Taylor Swift. She's been a fan of the game for a long time, but she's never seen her team win the championship. So I hope she's rewarded and sees her team win the Super Bowl.
Is she a Chiefs fan?
No, apparently she was.
Now, but
I was going to say she is now.
I think it was a Jets or a Giants fan. I think what she was, but yeah, clearly she is now.
Right.
So.
Yeah, she definitely is now. Yeah, I'm going to go with the 49ers. And part of it is, for one, it's just hard to win back-to-back. We know that. Even the Patriots that won 6 of them, were any of them back-to-back?
2 of them.
Yeah.
2 of them were?
2 of them were back-to-back, I believe.
I thought there was only one.
Maybe there's only one time they got back-to-back. I think. I know
but the Chiefs are doing things that even the Patriots.
I know one for sure because they almost went 3 in a row. The
Chiefs are doing things that even the Patriots didn't do though, right? Like the Chiefs have gone to 6 straight AFC Championship games. I don't think the Patriots ever did that. Like they're in the Super Bowl for the 4th time in 5 years.
Yeah, there's 3 other teams that have done 4 Super Bowls in 5 years, and that was
Patriots
the Bills.
Definitely did it once.
Patriots and who else? There was somebody else. It might have been. Did Dallas do it in the 90s? They won.
Yeah. You're
I
right.
think they went to 4 out of 5 years.
I don't think anybody's gone to 6 league championship games in a row.
They went back to back once, 03 and 04.
That's right.
And then they went 14, 16, 18.
Yeah,
so
they
2001,
took a break.
3, 4, 14, 16,
yeah,
18.
You get a little tired of having those parades all the time.
Right, but it's just real hard to go back to back in the NFL to begin with. And we already saw that, right? He already lost.
It's hard to make the playoffs 2 years in a row.
Right. So I'm going to go with the 49ers, but again, I do think their offense is different than a lot that Kansas City has completely dominated because they can go a lot of different ways. They can run the ball on you. They can use the running back out of the backfield as a pass catcher. They've got an elite tight end that you have to pay attention to because he can beat you for 65 yards. On any given play. They've got 2 wide receivers that one is the more traditional style that I think is one of the most underrated wide receivers in the league in Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah,
and then you've got, Debo that can beat you out of the backfield in the short passing game or beat you deep. Like not many teams in the NFL currently are built that way. That can beat you in a multitude of ways. Plus their defense is probably at least as good, close to as good as yours.
Yeah.
And your offense isn't as good. So I think 49ers are just the better team. I think those situations that we've seen for Kyle Shanahan that you talked about, I think those all help coaches in the playoffs, just like Dan Campbell is going to be helped by that situation that Detroit had last week in the future. If you're a good coach and you're learning stuff, and I like to think Kyle Shanahan's a pretty good coach in the NFL. So I think he's going to learn from those situations. And I think this is the one that gets him over the hump. And while it's going to be, we're going to hear a lot of these arguments about Brock Purdy and game manager and, all the shit we heard about. We talked about it last week, Tom Brady early in his career when he got his first couple and everybody said, oh, it's just product of the system. That's fucking fine.
Same thing.
That's fucking fine. If you win, you win. And if you have that Super Bowl ring, congratulations to you. Right. So,
yeah,
that's where I'm at. I think I'm going to take, Ayuk and Rice as TD scorers. I think both of those guys are going to get in the end zone in the Super Bowl.
You imagine the middle of the field is going to be hard for Travis Kelce to succeed in, because that's definitely where the Niners defense excels with the two linebackers. So I like that. I like Ayuk, and I like Rashee Rice.
CMC is too easy to pick. He just scores.
Yeah, and honestly,
gave you a ton either.
One of the biggest factors for the Chiefs on their success is going to be how Chris Jones plays, because if he can dominate the middle and create pressure up the middle, that's going to be the biggest factor on not only keeping that run game at bay, but like Brock Purdy not being able to let Brock Purdy step up in the playoffs. We saw that they essentially neutralized Aiden Hutchinson, which, there was no Brock Purdy had like no pressure that entire game. And he was able to pick apart a defense. Any professional quarterback with no pressure should be able to pick apart any defense that they play. And I just don't think that that's going to happen with the Chiefs. So I'm nervous on taking, it's hard to take touchdown scores against two good defenses. Right. So that's what I'm nervous about, but I like Rashee Rice the most out of all of them.
I think that Bryce is bang on the pass rush, and I think you could say the same thing for both sides of the football. Where the Niners defense gets really good, it's when Bosa can get home, and if Chase Young can get home. If those guys can get to the quarterback, we saw what Tampa did to Patrick Mahomes when they couldn't stop the pass rush, right? Like, I don't care who you are, you're going to struggle.
We saw the reason why the Patriots didn't have more back-to-back is because of the pass rush that the Giants had the two times that they lost to them.
There you go. So I don't care who you are. If you don't have time to throw the football, you don't have time to throw the football. But I think is it Juwan Taylor, that right tackle that likes to line up as far back as he can for the Chiefs?
Yeah.
I think Bosa might eat him for breakfast. So the Niners defense is totally different. If those guys can't get home, their secondary is incredibly average. And I don't think, obviously Greenlaw and guys like that in the linebacking core are elite. But they got to have the pass rush to win. So if Mahomes can escape that or can deal with that, I think they win. And Patrick Mahomes is Tom Brady-esque. These guys just find a way to win. And I just think that's what happens. But I'm not surprised if either team wins this. I'm a little annoyed that Detroit didn't hold on, because I'd have had so much more fun cheering for the Lions than cheering for either one of these two teams that I don't like.
Week one rematch too, where the Lions won. That'd have been
that'd have been fun.
More
a little
fun.
Full circle thing. Yeah, I don't disagree with you guys. My thing is the problem, if we're gonna say we're a little bit worried about Travis Kelce because of Bobby Wagner and Greenlaw and the linebacking core, then if that front is getting home on Mahomes, it makes it a lot harder, because he doesn't have that guy to go to if Kelce is covered up by those guys. And then you've got then you are relying solely on Rashee Rice, basically in the pass game, right?
Or quick dumps.
They're going to have to press the
ball.
Well,
right,
but
more. I just meant like the
I understand
and whatnot. But so again, I think that pass rush and everything goes, like you said, to both sides, and it could be tough for both. If Patrick Mahomes, if they switch spots and you were talking about pressure coming to Mahomes, and I knew he had Kittle or Debo or Ayuk or CMC, that's an entirely different thing. That's the benefit that Brock Purdy has that Patrick Mahomes doesn't have at this current time. even though the skill gap is huge between Mahomes and Purdy, the skill gap in talent around them on the offense also seems to be a pretty drastic difference on the other side of the coin there.
I think I like a Kyle Juszczyk anytime touchdown. Just feels like that kind of game.
That'd be fun. Probably pay pretty well too.
Yeah. And I like Mahomes as the MVP. You know, like if I think the Chiefs are going to win, I think I would rather bet Mahomes' MVP line than the Chiefs money line.
I kind of like Chris Jones as MVP.
I don't know when the last time. I don't know when the last time a defensive player won MVP.
Bryce Seahawks.
Like yeah,
not
probably.
Bobby Wagner. Who was that? Who was that guy?
Shoot, I can't remember.
The Legion of Boom had so many dudes.
It wasn't even it wasn't even like a main guy in that defense. Like he was a good player, but he wasn't like considered like in that top 4. He was a linebacker, an outside linebacker. And then after the game, that person did the 9/11 was perpetrated by our government. I remember that. After
I don't know about all that. Let's not get into conspiracies.
It was like his post game speech, and like someone just interrupted his post game speech of him after he got MVP or whatever. What was that guy's name?
I don't remember who that is, but I want to know what CMC's is.
For what? Because anytime?
40 no, for MVP.
MVP? I'm trying to find some odds here.
Because I could also see CMC multiple touchdowns, 180 all-purpose yards, and just having an awesome game and winning MVP if 49ers win. Especially if it's like a 21-17 or something. And he scores 2 of the touchdowns, and Purdy was only 200 for 1 touchdown or something. Then I could see CMC.
Malcolm Smith was the last defensive player. That's who it was. Malcolm Smith for Seattle linebacker.
Chris McCaffrey,
Butler,
and since then Dexter Jackson for Tampa Bay.
Mahomes is plus 125. Purdy's plus 225. McCaffrey's plus 475.
Von Miller got it.
That ain't bad.
50. Von Miller got.
And then it jumps to Kelsey at 1,200, Debo at 2, Pacheco 28, Raji Rice. I think he's going to score at plus 5,000. It's fun.
Yeah, that's not bad at all for Rice.
Nick Bosa plus 7,500.
What's Chris Jones?
He's not even on the list.
Man, that's mean.
All right, so we've got. I'm gonna call CMC for MVP. You called Mahomes over there. Who you calling? Are you calling Chris Jones?
I'll just be out of the. Yeah, I'll just say Chris Jones just to be fun.
Just to be fun.
I mean, the easy answer is Mahomes, right, or Purdy, but I'll take Chris Jones. I'll say it's a big defensive game, and he has a couple of sacks that maybe both potential game-changing sacks.
I mean, if Purdy puts up 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns against the Chiefs in the Super Bowl, I think he definitely deserves it.
And that game manager title's got to be stripped. That's the
that'll never be gone. That didn't end for Brady until he got his 7th Super Bowl with Tampa. That's
you don't have to be a good quarterback to win the Super Bowl either.
Well, correct. Trent Dilfer.
Well, you can make an argument that Flacco got hot at the right time. You can make an argument that Eli Manning wasn't the greatest quarterback, like Nick Foles, right? But I think that I'd be stunned if Purdy puts up 300 on this defense, and if he does, give him the MVP and call him whatever you want.
Right, that's why I was saying that, because I don't think it happens.
It's going to be a fun matchup game. I think Snead and Ayuk probably see a lot of each other. Your point about Wagner and Greenlaw and McKelsey, like that there's going to be a lot of fun game inside the game stuff. We'll see. Shanahan's been historically a horrible adjuster at